broken system. The Biden administration lifts a pandemic health rule, which could draw a surge of migrants across the southern border.
We inherited a broken and dismantled system that is already under strain.
Is the U.S. ready? Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas will be here. Plus, election season. As voters worry about the economy, Democrats brace for a midterm red wave.
I think the American people want to see a change.
Are Republicans prepared to lead? Arkansas Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson is coming up. And show of support. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi emphasizes the U.S. commitment to Ukraine in a surprise visit to Kyiv. And Poland is welcoming millions of Ukrainian refugees. But 50 years ago,
when the anti-Semitic campaign started, we started losing friends fast.
Is Polish generosity now a way to make up for the past? Good morning, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is showing solidarity with Ukraine. And we have breaking news. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced this morning a surprise visit to meet with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv, making her the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit Ukraine since Russia invaded. She spoke at a news conference this morning from Poland.
Do not be bullied by bullies. If they're making threats, you cannot back down. That's my view of it. That we're there for the fight, and you cannot fold to a bully.
Speaker Pelosi's visit comes as Congress is now considering whether to approve President Biden's request for $33 billion of additional aid for Ukraine. But while the White House works to get that passed, the president is also focusing his attention on challenges at home as his party gears up for the midterm elections. At the White House Correspondents' Dinner last night, he joked about facing bipartisan opposition to some of his policies. One of the major issues dividing his own party right now concerns over a move from the administration to lift Title 42, a Trump-era pandemic rule that makes it easier to turn away migrants at the border. A federal judge is keeping that rule in place for now, but President Biden faced bipartisan pushback over his plans to end the policy because of an expected massive influx of migrants at the border. Joining me now, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being here. Let's start with the numbers. About 7,000 migrants are currently apprehended per day. That's the highest in years. But your department's highest projections say that number could double or maybe even triple, as many as 18,000 per day, and that's without the pandemic restriction in place. Is that number really possible? And are you prepared, if so?
So, Dana, what we do is we prepare and we plan, and we've been doing so for months, understanding that the Title 42 authority that the CDC holds is not going to be around forever because, quite frankly, we want to conquer the pandemic and put it behind us. And remember, Title 42 is a public health authority. So what we started to do in September of last year was prepare for its end. And we're not projecting 18,000, but what we do in the department is we plan for different scenarios, so we're ready for anything that might materialize.
And I understand you're not projecting it, but it is an estimate that was put out by, as you said, by your department. And I just want to be clear, what you're telling me is that because that is a figure, again, that came from you guys, the department is prepared to handle that very large figure if, in fact, that comes to pass, 18,000 migrants per day?
It is our responsibility to be prepared for different scenarios, and that is what we are doing. And we have incredibly talented and dedicated people. There is no question that if, in fact, we reach that number, that is going to be an extraordinary strain on our system. But we are preparing for it, and that is why the plan we have prepared calls for a number of different actions, not just in the domestic arena, but also with our partners to the south.
I just want to, I'm sure you are well aware that there are some of your fellow Democrats who are very concerned about your plans, and they're concerned that you don't have plans that are really strong enough, especially some Democrats who are on the ballot in swing districts. Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, Alyssa Slotkin, they said that your plan is too little, too late. Congressman Greg Stanton said you are not prepared not even close. These are your fellow Democrats.
And I respectfully disagree, because the plan that we published this past Tuesday of last week, was not reflective of the fact that we just prepared this plan, but rather we've been planning for months and months. And we heard concerns, do you have a plan? And so what I did was I published a 20-page memorandum that described our plan in some level of detail to put to rest the concern that we have not been planning. We didn't just start this. We've been doing it for months.
So
That's
if
what we do.
18,000, if the highest projection, not estimate, projection comes out, estimate, not projection, comes out that 18,000 people cross the border per day, you are going to be able to handle that and handle it in a humane way.
Dana, that's going to put a strain on our system. Precisely why our plan also calls for a regional approach to what is a regional challenge. And we need countries to the south to manage their borders. This is not a phenomenon that the United States experiences alone. There are 1.8 million Venezuelans in Colombia. The Nicaraguans comprise almost 2% of the population in the small country of Costa Rica. We're seeing migration because of challenges that are not, restricted to this area. They are global.
Yes or no, will undocumented immigrants who are apprehended at the border be subject to a COVID test?
So we have been testing.
And that will continue?
And actually, we have moved into a different phase where we will be vaccinating non-citizens who are encountered at the border.
As you well know, there is a big move in Congress to keep what we are talking about, Title 42, in place. And some lawmakers are floating legislation to keep it in place and pair it with what you consider must-pass legislation, some more coronavirus funding for Ukraine. If that large legislation passes, would the president sign it?
I can't speak for the president, but I will tell you that as we are concerned in the Department of Homeland Security, that Title 42 authority, and as the law provides, is a public health authority driven by a public health imperative, and the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, makes that assessment. What we do is we implement Title 42, as we have been, and when it ends, we will use the other immigration enforcement provisions, or the authorities at our discretion.
So you, as the Secretary of Homeland Security, don't have an opinion on whether Title 42 should or should not be in place?
I do not, because I'm not a public health expert, but it's my responsibility to plan and execute as it is in place, and plan, prepare, and execute for the day when it won't be.
You told me on the show last year that your message was, do not come. That was your message to migrants. What's your message now?
The same, the very same, because our border is not open. What happens now is individuals are either expelled under the Title 42 authority, or they are placed in immigration enforcement proceedings, and they are removed if they do not have a valid claim under our law to remain. And so the border is not open. And importantly, they should not place their lives at risk in the hands of smugglers who exploit their lives for the mere purpose of profit.
So just to be clear, if somebody is watching this from another country considering coming, your message is?
Do not come.
Let's talk about a different topic, which is what you are calling, your department is calling the Disinformation Governance Board. You unveiled that this week. Republicans are calling it Orwellian and comparing it to the Ministry of Truth in the novel 1984. Can you clarify what exactly is this? What exactly will this Disinformation Governance Board do? Will it monitor American citizens?
Dan, I'm very pleased to do so. It's clear. I mean, those criticisms are precisely the opposite of what this small working group within the Department of Homeland Security will do. And I think we probably could have done a better job of communicating what it does and does not do.
So
the fact is that disinformation that creates a threat to the security of the homeland is our responsibility to address. And this department has been addressing it for years, throughout the years of the prior administration, and on an ongoing basis. disinformation from Russia,
Right.
China,
We know the
Iran.
problems, but it's still not clear to me how this governance board will act. What will it do?
So what it does is it works to ensure that the way in which we address threats, the connectivity between threats and acts of violence are addressed without infringing on free speech, protecting civil rights and civil liberties, the right of privacy. And the board, this working group, internal working group, will draw from best practices and communicate those best practices to the operators, because the board does not have operational authority.
Will American citizens be monitored?
No.
Guarantee that.
Well, so what we do, we in the Department of Homeland Security don't monitor American citizens.
You don't, but will this board change that?
No, no, no. The board does not have any operational authority or capability. What it will do is gather together best practices in addressing the threat of disinformation from foreign state adversaries, from the cartels, and disseminate those best practices to the operators that have been executing in addressing this threat for years.
Republicans are criticizing your decision, the administration's decision to choose Nina Jankowicz to lead this disinformation board. They say she is not somebody who is neutral. Your response?
Eminently qualified, a renowned expert in the field of disinformation. Absolutely so.
Would you be okay if Donald Trump were president, if he created this disinformation board, governance board, or if it is in place and he wins again in 2024, that he's in charge of such a thing?
I believe that this working group that gathers together best practices, makes sure that our work is coordinated, consistent with those best practices, that we're safeguarding the right of free speech, that we're safeguarding civil liberties, I think is an extraordinarily important endeavor.
Before I let you go, I'm sure you have heard that Kevin McCarthy, now the Republican leader who hopes to be Speaker if Republicans take over in November, will consider impeaching you. Your response?
I am incredibly proud to work with 250,000 dedicated and talented personnel, and I look forward to continuing to do so.
No concern about that?
I am not. I am focused on mission and supporting our incredible workforce.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for coming in this morning.
Thank you, Dana.
President Biden is planning to go on offense as his party fears big midterm losses to Republicans. But if Republicans win, how would they govern? GOP Governor Asa Hutchinson is next. And innocent civilians fleeing Ukraine now finding refuge in a place that not too long ago was displacing its own. That's ahead. Welcome back to State of the Union. It's the final stretch for the Republican candidates battling it out ahead of Tuesday's primaries. The most high-profile, the rough and tumble Ohio Senate race, which will test the power of a Trump endorsement more than a year after he left office. But it's not smooth sailing for Democrats either, as they try to sharpen their midterm message amid some troubling economic signs. Here to discuss is Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas. Thank you so much for joining me, sir. So inflation is at a 40-year high, and the U.S. economy actually shrank over the first 3 months of 2022. But there are some positive signs, like the labor market is strong. President Biden says he is not worried about a recession. Are you?
I am. I think that anybody that looks at where we are and the fact that we didn't have any economic growth this last quarter has to be concerned about that. Whenever you've had sustained growth for so many years consistently, you know that you've got to be prepared in the event that comes, and I think there is a possibility of that down the road. Whenever you have high inflationary pressures, whenever you have interest rates going up to slow the economy down, these are stressors on it. You add that to the supply chain woes that we have, we've got challenges. And so this administration needs to address those, and they need to do it quickly.
You mentioned supply chain woes. A lot of many economists say that the drop in the GDP was due to temporary factors like the supply chain disruptions, a big trade deficit due to those supply chain issues. And they point to high consumer spending, business investment as signs that the underlying economy is strong.
Well, here in Arkansas, we have a strong underlying economy in the sense that we are creating jobs. We have surpluses in our budget. We have a $1 billion surplus right now. But we also know that underlying that are consumers that are hurting. And so while the state budget is doing well, you've got families that are struggling with gas prices, with energy costs. And so we're looking at returning that money back to the taxpayers so that they can have some relief. But that's one solution. That what we worry about is not just the next 3 months, but the next year. And whenever you're seeing flailing or struggling stock market prices, that impacts families as well. We hope that we can strengthen this economy by more job creation, but also controlling federal spending. There's a lot of signals that are just bad, such as canceling student debt. These are irresponsible actions that are being put out by the administration in an election year, but it doesn't help us to provide confidence in the direction that we're going.
You mentioned student debt. Don't you think canceling student debt would be helpful to the residents in Arkansas who are having trouble making ends meet out in the world because they have to pay so much in student loan debt?
Well, sure, it'd be helpful to them. It'd be helpful to cancel rent for them. It'd be helpful to pay all their utility bills. It'd be helpful to help on mortgage payments. But the question is, what is the right solution? And again, we're looking at not providing more relief, but trying to return more of what we're collecting in terms of taxes back to the taxpayers. That will help them, and it's a more long-term solution as well. And so you cannot have the federal government intervening in all of these areas in terms of giveaway programs. You've got to have a better, solid economic plan, and that's what we're missing right now.
I want to turn to some issues in your party right now. Leaked audio shows Republican House Leader Kevin McCarthy saying then President Trump bore responsibility for January 6th and that he should resign. In public, as you know, he's lied about that and about what he has fully embraced, which is now Donald Trump. You served 2 terms in Congress. Would you feel comfortable with Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House if Republicans take control in November?
Well, of course, Speaker McCarthy, Majority Leader McCarthy has his own set of challenges within the caucus. And he's got to be able to somehow bring that together if he's going to get elected to Speaker, if we win the majority.
If you were still there, would you vote for him?
Will.
For Speaker?
I'm not going to comment on that because it all depends upon who the alternative is. But I would say that we had one message after January 6th among many of our leaders recognizing the problem with the insurrection, and that tone has changed, and I believe that that's an error. I don't think we can diminish what happened on January 6th. We're going to be having hearings there in Congress that's going to be coming out, a bunch of this public in June, and that's not going to be helpful for those that diminished the significance of that event. And so that worries me in terms of not just the majority leader, but also worries me in terms of other leaders that have diminished what happened on January 6th.
Your fellow Republican Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida signed a law effectively punishing Disney for its criticism of legislation restricting how sexual orientation and gender identity are taught in schools. Do you support DeSantis's move against Disney?
Well, first of all, Disney has handled this very poorly. Secondly, the law that was passed is, to me, common sense that in those grades, those lower grades, you shouldn't be teaching sexual orientation and those matters that should not be covered at that age. But I don't believe that government should be punitive against private businesses because we disagree with them. That's not the right approach either. And so to me, that's the old Republican principle of having a restrained government. And so let's do the right thing. It's a fair debate about these special tax privileges. I understand that debate. But let's not go after businesses and punish them because we disagree with what they said.
So DeSantis overstepped.
Well, I disagree with it. I disagree with a punitive approach to businesses.
Understood.
Businesses make mistakes they shouldn't have done there, but we should not be punishing them for their private actions.
Before I let you go, you previously told me you were keeping your options open as your term as governor ends. Options potentially being 2024. You spoke at the Politics and Eggs event in New Hampshire, a traditional stop for any presidential hopeful. Are you seriously considering running for president?
I am, but you've got to get through, of course, this year, but that's an option that's on the table, and that's one of the reasons I was in New Hampshire, and you had Secretary Mayorkas on, and the border security is such an incredible issue. That's the kind of thing that I'm passionate about whenever you look at we need to have Title 42 or some equivalent to it. Secondly, we've got to go after the cartels in a more vigorous fashion. And then thirdly, we've got to support the states in the role that we play. So there's much to be done there. I care about those issues. And so, yes, I'm going to be engaged this year and hopefully beyond that.
Even if President Trump runs, you will run? Consider running. His candidacy won't affect yours?
No, it won't. I've made it clear I think we ought to have a different direction in the future. And so I'm not aligned with him on some of his endorsements, but also the direction he wants to take our country. I think he did a lot of good things for our country, but we need to go a different direction. And so that's not a factor in my decision-making process.
Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Great to be with you today.
And President Biden cracked some jokes last night. We'll talk about how they landed. Plus, is Donald Trump still a kingmaker? That's next.
I'm not really here to roast the GOP. That's not my style. Besides, there's nothing I can say about the GOP that Kevin McCarthy hasn't already put on tape. This is the first time the president attended this dinner in 6 years. It's understandable. We had a horrible plague, followed by 2 years of COVID. Just imagine if my predecessor came to this dinner this year. Now that would really have been a real coup if that occurred.
There's some cringes in the audience on that one. Welcome back to State of the Union. Our panel is here now. We want to start talking about the midterms because we're seeing a big primary this week in Ohio. Everybody's gearing up for it. And we have a new ABC News Washington Post poll out this morning, which shows the American people trust Republicans over Democrats on inflation by 19 percentage points. The UC at 19 percentage points. And probably no surprise, people in this poll said that they consider inflation a very important issue to them and to their lives. Bakari Sellers.
Well, thank you.
What do you do with that?
Coming to me first. Inflation is the #1 issue in the country. I think that everybody would recognize that. Anybody who is paying attention to grocery prices, to the prices of just everyday goods and services just rising and skyrocketing. And Democrats outside of Ukraine and Russia, every domestic policy should be looked at through the lens of how it would affect inflation.
Are they doing that? The White House?
I think we are doing it, but I think that Democrats are having the same problem we had during the Obama era, which is we don't communicate well. We don't message well. We don't punch back at all. And so when you have a lack of messaging, you allow other people to fill that void. The blessing that we have, though, going into the midterms is none other than Donald Trump, because he's endorsing some straight up lunatics. And the more lunatics he endorses, it reminds me of Todd Aiken when he was running, and the young lady who said, "I'm not a witch." It reminds me of that time frame because we're going to have some awful Republican candidates who win and give Democrats a chance.
But there's also some good candidates that are winning and are going to fuel this red wave that we're going to see in 2022. Also in that poll, the second issue that people were polled on was crime. And this is an issue when you look at South and West Texas, you're going to see near record turnout, if not record turnout of Latinos for Republicans, primarily because of the issue of border security. And when you live on the border, border security is a public safety issue. And this is what's going to fuel some of the fact that you're likely to have 3 of the 5 House members that represent the Texas-Mexico border being Republicans. When I was in Congress, I was the only one. So these are the 2 issues. And ultimately, the administration, when it comes on inflation, needs to stop saying they don't have anything they can do about it. Right? That's usually one of the leads in saying it's not our fault. Nobody wants to hear that, and they want to say, hey, how are you going to get us out of this?
Well, the irony, of course, is right. The idea of issues on the border poll really high in places that are nowhere near the border, like Kansas, and where there are no minorities. So it's more of that messaging of being afraid of each other here in the United States, of being afraid of a more browning of America. The idea that the police are the only solution to that, and that the rise in crime is due to Democrats is also false. We've coming out of a pandemic. We have rising gun sales. We have social unrest. None of the cities that the Republicans like to cite as has high crime spikes had actually defunded the police. So we need to recognize there are serious systemic policies here. It's not just a matter of Democratic messaging.
Bakari, hang on one second. I just want this Republican.
Well, I think the new mayor of New York City proves the case that when you focus on trying to address the issues of crime, and yes, let's talk about the fundamental reasons that we're seeing some of these things happen. But when there is still a narrative, and I would say the median Democrat does not believe in defund the police, but when the public views the party as more in line with that narrative, that's what's going to fuel some of these losses.
And the irony here is that New York City, as an example, paid $750 million just this year in overtime for police.
Oh, God, I'm
and
sorry.
inflation, right? The idea of a pocketbook issue of inflation, of how you can help people right now, is student loan debt relief.
I just want to get some coffee and watch these. This is great
But
TV.
Bakari, as you respond, I just want to give one bit of good news for Democrats in this poll, which is what we call the generic ballot. Do you want a Democrat or a Republican to be in Congress? Democrats are 46%, Republicans are 45%. It's a bit of an uptick for Democrats.
Yeah, and I go back to messaging and the way that Democrats message, right? I know that James Carville and Paul Begala probably love the fact that I'm hitting on the fact we don't have a message or we don't articulate it in ways we should. If you look at South Carolina, you have Daniel Rickman, a Republican mayor, of Columbia, you have Henry McMaster, Republican governor, and violent crime is skyrocketing. They have done nothing to address violent crime other than pass a CRT ban, right? But if you look at cities like Little Rock, where you have Mayor Frank Scott, if you look at Randall Woofin in Birmingham, if you look at Vilaus in Charlotte, where you see mayors actually addressing those root causes, and where you're seeing crime level off and decrease, and you see them actively addressing it by supporting police, but also dealing with the root causes, then you understand that we have to change the narrative.
I want to go back to what you mentioned, we mentioned at the beginning, which is that there are some Republican primaries coming up, starting in just 2 days in Ohio. Before we get to that, I should say that you have a new book out, a very good one, American Reboot, An Idealist's Guide to Getting Big Things Done. On that note, what we're seeing in Ohio, just like we're seeing in several other big, important Republican primaries in important states, you have a Trump-endorsed candidate, J.D. Vance, and then you have others out there. This is an issue that the Republicans are dealing with in real time.
Sure, I'm gonna give y'all the end of the story. Okay, some Donald Trump endorsed candidates are going to win. Some are going to lose.
I mean, that's brilliant.
Right?
That is just brilliant.
And so this notion...
It's going to come down to turnout.
Right, look, it comes down to turnout. Candidates matter, right? We love to try to nationalize elections. You know, you were talking about those cases of people running in places like Little Rock. When you talk about the issues that people on the ground matter, then you're gonna be able to be successful. And yes, but look, you know, should some of these people that I would not vote for, going to get elected? Yeah. And the problem is going to be for Republicans is that we're going to let what I consider to be the authoritarian wing of the party drive the agenda after we take back the House and likely take back the Senate.
And they could lose these Senate seats, if they're what you call the authoritarian wing.
Not just a matter of messaging or even an endorsement for Trump. In 2018, Ohio passed a constitutional amendment to not allow partisan gerrymandering, to have the city of Cincinnati, which is half black, to remain whole. Instead, they are now running on a map that carves up that city where the white suburbs now have a majority of the population. So if we don't address the fundamentals of how people get to the polls, how they can vote, that one vote, one person promise is absolutely broken in Ohio.
Last word, 20 seconds.
No, I actually agree. But I think that when you look at the map and you see candidates like Herschel Walker, for example, when you look at candidates like J.D. Vance and you see him in this battle with Mandel, none of those three deserve to be in the United States Senate. And I just say that as a matter of fact as I possibly can. But yet they're riding this Trump wave. And until the Republican Party deals with the cancer that is Trumpism, and I understand they love the economic policies, we can have those debates. But the undergirding of the bigotry, the undergirding of the xenophobia, and the undergirding of the anti-intellectualism, that is the problem. And that, unfortunately, is going to give
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for that great discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nice to see you in person. See you guys.
Go get that book. It's good.
Coming up next, how parts of Poland's dark history may have affected its approach now as it welcomes millions of refugees from Putin's war. Poland has welcomed nearly 3 million Ukrainian refugees since Russian President Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. It may be, in part, lessons learned from Poland's own history. Dark periods like some 50 years ago when the communist government forced thousands of Jews to leave.
This is the only major synagogue in Warsaw the Nazis did not destroy, a place of worship once again.
How many Jews are left in Poland?
It's impossible to say.
Impossible not only because Adolf Hitler murdered 3 million Polish Jews, many he did not kill hid their Jewish identity after World War II, and a more recent reason. In 1968, the communist government forced many of Poland's remaining Jews to leave the country.
In March of 1968, there were rumblings in society against the government, and the government decided that the best way to deal with this social tension, the social opposition to the government, was by claiming, the Jews. It's all the Jews doing it.
Which is the scapegoat line that has been used for millennia.
Correct. Tried and true.
1968 was the year of student revolution throughout the world.
It was the late 1960s. Protests were raging not just on American college campuses, but Polish universities, and the communist government didn't like it. This exhibit at Polin, the Jewish museum in Warsaw, illustrates what happened. After Israel's victory over its Arab neighbors in the 1967 Six-Day War, Poland's communist leader, Władysław Gomulka, spoke out against Zionism, thinly veiled hate code.
He never mentioned a word Jew, but he says he didn't have to. He was talking about Zionists. After this speech, this huge wave of anti-Semitic campaign began.
Tell me your story from 1968.
It was a very typical 68 story. When the anti-Semitic campaign started, we started losing friends fast.
Konstanty Gebert was a Polish high school student in 1968.
Got beaten up on the street for being a dirty Jew, and standing there rubbing my face and wondering, what was that all about?
His family's life was upended by anti-Semitism.
I got expelled from high school for being of Zionist extraction. This was the official reason.
Gebert, now a prominent Polish journalist, found a way to stay in Poland. Many Jews forced from their jobs and homes could not.
They were told that they have to leave their home. They were forced to emigrate. They were allowed to leave with one document. This is the kind of the passport, which is even not called passport because it's one-way document, which means that you could only leave Poland and never come back.
So one way.
One way. And they were allowed, as you see here, to have with them only $5, nothing else.
Is that you?
My uncle, Alex Gelber, got one of those one-way tickets out of Poland. In 1968, he was 20 and in medical school.
Do you remember the moment when you realized you had to go?
Yes, it was very unpleasant because I was pulled out from this fairly protected environment to the situation in which I'm essentially like nobody. You had an official who would stand over you and would say, well, you can take this item or you can take this piece of whatever, some possession, jewelry or something, and then you cannot take the other.
His father, George Gelber, was a prominent doctor and professor and a Jew.
He was given a choice. They say, well, you can resign, by yourself, or we will fire you. Obviously, it made no difference. And so he said, no, I am not going to resign. You have to tell me that I'm not worthy being here.
This after surviving Hitler.
For your parents, it was only 25 years after the Holocaust.
Yeah. And that was, and they tried to build this semi-normal future, and it just didn't work well.
Back in Poland, Alex's family on his mother's Catholic side were in the dark.
It was a kind of shock. We were behind the Iron Curtain. We had no news, no messages. It was like a disappearance of this very rapid way. Yeah.
Your family just disappeared.
They're just gone. Yeah. And nobody knew what happens, how they are living, are they fine or not.
Alex finished medical school in Italy, then came to the U.S. to reconnect with his parents and met and married my aunt, Dr. Linda Wolf. His sister became a doctor in the U.S. Army, Colonel Renata Greenspan.
When you look at what's happening in Poland now, the Poles are welcoming the Ukrainians with open arms. Do you think it's a lesson learned?
I hope so. I hope so. They are ordinary people who open their homes and they let people move in. So this is heartening.
As a former refugee yourself,
yeah.
What's it like?
It's uncanny similar. It's this hate and tolerance, and they drive people out, and people are desperate, and they don't know when will they come back. This passage leaves the mark that doesn't leave you.
Poland's loss is my gain, because I got an uncle out of it.
That is terrific. I gained a wife.
We'll be right back. As we confront the forces that are pulling us apart, a new CNN series is looking at the common threads that draw people across the world together.
I'm Carlton McCoy. I'm a black and Jewish man, one who grew up in a pretty impoverished part of America. Even though most kids like me don't have much of a chance, I got out. The journey from where I started...
I got something out of culinary school, huh?
...to where I am now...
This guy, this is the sommelier?
...has allowed me to move in and out of different places in the world.
Are you a lefty? Huh, I'm not, but it was just right here. Usually right here. He's like, I'm on the clock. This thing is huge.
Well, most people was like, how can you eat something that smells like that? After all, we carry our travels with us to our next destination.
That's so cool.
That's what life is all about.
This is incredible, huh?
I'm a nomad. Let's do this.
Nomad with Carlton McCoy, tonight at 10 on CNN.
This is GPS, the global public square. Welcome to all of you in the United States and around the world. I'm Fareed Zakaria. Today on the program, can Russia be weakened enough in Ukraine to force it to retreat in defeat? Can Kyiv actually emerge victorious? British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said maybe not. But on Thursday, President Biden asked Congress for $33 billion in additional aid to Ukraine, a dramatic increase.
We need to contribute arms, funding, ammunition, and the economic support to make their courage and sacrifice have purpose.
I will ask Ukrainian President Zelensky's top aide, Andrei Yermak, if Ukraine is getting what it needs to win. Then, looking east, will Putin's invasion inspire China to attack Taiwan? That is the big question. I put it to Taiwan's foreign minister in a fascinating, exclusive interview. But first, here's my take. At first glance, the war in Ukraine would seem to confirm President Biden's oft-expressed view that the world today is marked by a contest between democracies and autocracies. After all, autocratic Russia is waging a savage assault on democratic Ukraine, and the latter enjoys the staunch support of Western democracies. On closer examination, however, that framework turns out to be neither accurate nor helpful as a guide for American foreign policy. It's true that many of the world's democracies have lined up to support Ukraine, but the world's most populous democracy, India, has neither condemned the Russian aggression nor promised to abide by the sanctions against Moscow. And it's not just India. Asia's second largest democracy, Indonesia, has been reserved in its stance on Russia. The largest successful democracy on the African continent, South Africa, has also refused to condemn Russia and has even blamed NATO expansion for provoking Russia's invasion. The two largest democracies in Latin America, Brazil and Mexico, have mostly remained neutral and abstained from voting to remove Russia from the UN Human Rights Council. Iraq, the Arab world's only functioning democracy, voted to abstain on the resolution condemning Russia. Assessed by populations, a majority of the people who live in democracies have chosen, in this great ideological struggle, to sit on the fence. At one level, this might seem a simple case of national interest trumping idealism. Many of these countries have economic interests that would suffer were they to cut ties with Moscow. India, for example, gets most of its advanced weaponry from Russia. South Africa and Brazil have trade relations with the Russians that, while not crucial at all, are significant. Yet the idea of a grand ideological crusade against autocracies leaves most developing countries very nervous. Many of them have strong economic ties to China and are closely allied to other autocracies in their neighborhoods. A much better way to frame the division in the world is between countries that believe in a rules-based international order and those that don't. Russia has revealed itself to be the world's leading rogue state, intent on attacking the heart of this order, the norm that borders do not get changed by force. Moscow is seeking a return to the realm of pure power politics, one in which, in Thucydides' phrase, the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. If the West were to rally the world against this effort, it would find it had many allies. As former British Foreign Secretary David Miliband said to me, a division based on the rules-based order is much more inclusive than one based on democracies versus autocracies. A country like Singapore, for example, which is not a full-fledged liberal democracy, is nonetheless staunchly supportive of international norms and values. At the beginning of the Russian invasion, it decided, for the first time in over 40 years, to enforce international sanctions even though they had not been imposed by the UN Security Council due to the fear of a Russian veto. Countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are unlikely to join an appeal to battle autocracies, since they are themselves absolute monarchies, but a call to uphold an open international system might well have more traction. For India or Indonesia, this framing could force them to think harder about the consequences of allowing Russia's aggression to stand. If countries can get away with military incursions and the annexation of their neighbors' lands, New Delhi will have a weaker case against potential Chinese moves in its borderlands with India. As Kenya's ambassador to the UN pointed out shortly before the invasion, African countries have chosen to accept colonial borders precisely because they understand the chaos that would be unleashed if countries tried to redraw them along purely cultural or ethnic lines. Such a framing also places much greater pressure on China, which is arguably the greatest beneficiary of the rules-based international order. It is this open framework that has allowed China to rise peacefully in a stable, prosperous Asia. And Beijing has often spoken out forcefully against violations of countries' sovereignty. It is this aspect of Chinese hypocrisy that would be worth highlighting and emphasizing. Of course, for this strategy to work, the West, and the United States in particular, must itself adhere to a rules-based international system more zealously. American actions, particularly the Iraq War, often prompt accusations of Western hypocrisy. The Biden administration has called for war crimes investigations against Russia, but it is itself not a member of the International Criminal Court. America rails against China's violation of the Law of the Seas Treaty in the South China Seas, while it is itself not a signatory to that treaty. If Washington wants the world to support a rules-based international order, it must get better at practicing what it preaches. Go to cnn.com/Fareed for a link to my Washington Post column this week. And let's get started. My first guest today, Andrei Yermak, is often referred to as the second most powerful politician in Ukraine, the most powerful, of course, being President Volodymyr Zelensky. Yermak runs Zelensky's presidential office and is also very close to the president personally, having been his business partner for years before the two entered politics. Yermak has been deeply involved in international negotiations, is a frequent communication with President Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, and other top Western officials. After a week that saw the UN Secretary General and the U.S. Secretaries of State and Defense visit Kyiv, I wanted to hear from him. Welcome to the program, Andrei.
Hello, Farid.
Andrei, as we watch recent military developments, we're trying to understand where things stand. In the first phase of the war in the north, Ukraine heroically repelled the Russian attempt to take over Kyiv. But now Russian forces in the south do seem to be expanding their control of the Donbass. What is the state of play, and will Ukraine be able to get back these territories that Russia is expanding into?
Of course, Farid, it's our goal in this war, and our military forces and our brave army, of course, back all our territory which is temporarily occupied. You are right that now the biggest battles concentrated in the southeast of Ukraine, and especially in Donbass. And of course, all the world now know the name of our city, Mariupol, in which it's still very difficult, I can say, catastrophic situation. It's practically destroyed for more than 90%. But of course, we are planned, and we want, and I'm sure we are back all our territories.
Do you believe that the aid that President Biden is proposing now, the $33 billion, is that going to be a turning point? It is a much larger sum than he has ever asked for before. And people are making comparisons to America's assistance to Britain in 1940 when Britain stood all alone. Do you feel this is a game changer?
First of all, we are here very strongly that United States sure and believe in Ukrainian victory in this war. The second, it's really change the level of our relationship. I can say, and it was the dream, it was the goal of the President Zelensky and all our team, that our relationship started finally be like a real equal partnership. And today we can surely say, yes, it's happened. And I say that we are very appreciative because we know definitely that today mostly American citizens, Americans people carry out about what happened in my country. And really, this strong support, it's very important for us. And this very big and very strong arguments for our victory. And I'm sure it will be victory, not just Ukraine. It will be victory and United States, our mutual victory, victory of all democracy world. Because, you know, today for us, it's a life of our people. It's a life of our children. It's a life of our civilians. It's a life of our soldiers. But we, our brave nation, show for all the world that we win, and we are sure about it.
You know, Andre, there are a lot of people in America, in other Western countries too, but let's focus on America because there is this big bill before Congress for $33 billion of aid. There are a lot of people who say, why should the United States spend so much money on something that is happening so far away from America's borders? Congressmen have raised this issue. What is your message to people as to why your struggle is one America should care about?
After 24th of February, I think all the world, all the free world, democracy world, understand it happened in any places in the world. And now Ukraine defend not just our country, we defend real democracy.
Stay with us. When we come back, I'm going to ask Andrei Yermak if Ukraine is willing to make concessions to get to a negotiated end to this war. And we are back with Andrei Yermak. He is Ukrainian President Zelensky's top aide, often referred to as the second most powerful politician in Ukraine. Andrei, there have been some negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Is it your impression in those meetings, are the Russians negotiating seriously?
I can say that Ukrainian position is absolutely clear and the principle in the beginning. Not Ukraine started this war, not Ukraine occupied somebody's territories. Ukraine never be aggressive country. Ukraine never going the aggression to the Russia. It's mean that for us it's the most important. It's our independence, it's our sovereignty and territorial integrity. And this is for what we are fighting. We are fighting for our land and for the freedom. And of course, I think that then it will be real progress and will be real progress for us. It's the decisions, then this war will be stopped and then our territory will be deoccupied and Russian troops go out from our territory. This is the main goal for us, for Ukraine in these negotiations.
It seems clear that this war is going to have to end in some kind of negotiation, that there is not going to be a total victory either by the Russians or really by Ukraine. So is Ukraine willing to make some adjustments, accommodations, concessions, call them what you will, to Russian demands such as no NATO membership, or recognize Crimea, or recognize Donetsk and Luhansk? Is Ukraine willing to move on some of these issues?
For us, there is three very principal things for which we not ready. And for us, compromise of this not acceptable. It's our independence, it's our sovereignty and territorial integrity. Of course, we want maybe more than somebody else to stop this war. Our people want to stop this war. But for us, it's important that Ukraine will win this war. I hope that we can find the ways out of these situations. But once again, today, our people continue to fighting, and we will be fighting up to the full our victory. And full our victory, once again, it's back to control of all our territories. That's all.
Let me finally ask you, Andrei, about your personal situation. For a long time, you and President Zelensky were sharing a room, an underground bunker. You had not seen your families. Has any of that changed now that the situation in Kyiv is somewhat better? Have you been able to see your family?
Yes, you're right. We hear all these days, beginning of the early morning of the 24th of February. We all the days here. Yes, we have the opportunity to meet shortly with our families, but continue be here, continue to work, continue to fighting, because the war is not ending. And our people in most difficult situation, our soldier cannot stopping fighting, not stop in the night, not stop in the morning. And our obligations and obligations of all people, all in the power, in the politics of Ukraine, it's our obligation. We have to be in our place and continue to do our best and to do everything important that to come to be closer to our victory, to support our people. We have to be examples to all the world. And I am absolutely sure that this will be so.
Andrei Yermak, pleasure to have you on. Stay safe, of course, and we hope to hear more from you in the future.
Thank you, Farid. Thank you very much.
Next on GPS, the Foreign Minister of Taiwan on the grave concern that China might be inspired by Russia and attack Taiwan. Also tonight on CNN, Stanley Tucci is back. New episodes, new discoveries, and more food. The new season of Searching for Italy premieres tonight at 9 p.m. on CNN.
Want a daily dose of Fareed and his team? Now you can get it with Fareed's Global Briefing, the newsletter that gives you the best insight and analysis on global affairs. Go to cnn.com/Fareed to sign up.
As Russian troops were invading Ukraine in late February, many eyes shifted to the east, to China. They were watching to see whether or not Beijing would be inspired by Moscow's actions and attack Taiwan. In recent years, China has been increasingly belligerent towards Taiwan in both rhetoric and actions. China, of course, still views Taiwan as part of its territory, even though the island has been separately governed for some 70 years. I had an exclusive interview with Taiwan's Foreign Minister, Joseph Wu. We talked about fears of a Chinese invasion and much more. Mr. Foreign Minister, pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much.
So first I have to ask you, as you're watching this war in Ukraine, like all of us, but you're looking at it as the Foreign Minister of Taiwan, what lessons are you drawing?
In fact, I've been watching this very carefully, and we are trying to draw as many lessons as possible. The first thing is that there's some similarities in between the two, Ukraine and Taiwan. Ukraine is on the front line against Russia's outward expansion. Russia claims Ukraine, and Russia used force against Ukraine for its historical glory. And if you look at China, China also claims Taiwan, and China is so much more powerful than Taiwan. And China says that it will not exclude the use of force against Taiwan, and it's been conducting military exercises around Taiwan. So this is some similarity in between the two. But we are also trying to look at the Russian actions, which is not advancing in a very smooth way for the Russian perspective. And therefore, we try to see what we can learn from Ukraine in defending ourselves. There are two things, of course. The first is asymmetric capability. Look at the Ukrainians. They use small personal weapons to go against a large enemy. And I think that is something that we can learn from. In fact, we have been preparing for that, but we need to make more investment in this regard. And the second area that we can learn from Ukraine is civil defense. Look at the Ukrainian people. All the males are having the determination to defend the country. They want to serve in the military. They want to go to the war zones to fight against Russia. And that kind of spirit is enviable for the Taiwanese people. And therefore, it's not just the Taiwanese government that has learned the lesson. It's also the Taiwanese people. The people here in Taiwan are more determined to defend ourselves than ever before. But of course, we have to watch out very carefully. When there's a war, we need friends and allies to support Taiwan, as in the case of Ukraine. Look at the United States and Europe, Japan, and etc. They all come together to support Ukraine. And Taiwan needs that. And the problem with Taiwan is that Taiwan is not being recognized by the international community. And therefore, Taiwan needs to act in order to have better relations with the like-minded countries so that they will come to Taiwan's assistance when we need it.
What do you think Beijing is learning from this? Because at the start of this invasion, a lot of people thought maybe Beijing will view this as a green light, as an opportunity to do its own invasion or some kind of military operation across the Taiwan Straits. Do you think that watching the war in Ukraine, the Beijing is more likely, or are they watching and saying, this is more complicated than we thought?
This is a very difficult issue for Taiwan to answer. We don't live in China, and we don't live in Beijing. We are not decision makers of Beijing to think for Beijing. But if we put ourselves in the shoes of Beijing, they might learn several things. The first is possible international reactions, whether the United States is going to come to Taiwan's help. In the case of Ukraine, even though the United States has declared very early on that it's not going to get militarily involved. But at the end, you see the United States is putting in lots of resources to Ukraine to support the Ukrainians to fight against Russia. So I think the Chinese government must be thinking or calculating how the United States or other major countries are going to come to Taiwan's help, or whether they are going to come to Taiwan's help. If Taiwan does not have any support, I think that's going to be a green light to aggression. And the second thing, if they think that Taiwan is weak and easy to take over, I think it's an open invitation for Beijing's aggression. But I think we have seen from Ukraine, the case of Ukraine is that even though they seem to be weaker than Russia, but the desire to defend the country and the willingness to use personal weapons against the Russian enemy is something that they are able to defend themselves. And therefore, Beijing must think twice whether they are able to take Taiwan over and defeat Taiwan in a few days. If they are not able to take Taiwan over quickly, I think they need to pause and think twice before they act. Fortunately, the case of Ukraine and the determination of the international community to come and support Ukraine shows that the authoritarianism need to confront the fact that the democracies are more united than ever against authoritarianism.
Since the Russian invasion in Ukraine, have you heard from democracies around the world? Have you received any kind of messages of solidarity or support?
In fact, there's a lot. And it started way before the war started. They know that if there's going to be a war over Taiwan, it's going to be a disaster for the rest of the world. So we are very happy that there's a growing awareness of the international community to care about the situation Taiwan is in. And beginning from late last year, you have seen waves of visitors coming to Taiwan, especially the parliamentarians in Europe. They debated in a parliament and they adopted resolutions in support of Taiwan, and they came to Taiwan to show their support. And it's exactly like what the American congressmen or senators have done. So we are very happy that the fellow democracies are paying more attention to Taiwan, showing more support for Taiwan. And after the war in Ukraine, if you search on the internet, two terms come up. One is Ukraine, and the second is Taiwan, because people in the world cares about Taiwan.
Most countries around the world do not have the deep and extensive ties with Russia that they do with mainland China. So do you worry that China's economic clout will mean that countries are willing to sanction Russia, but they may not be willing to sanction China?
That is a possibility. And we have been discussing not only among ourselves, but also with like-minded partners to see what can be done if China launches war against Taiwan. If you hear the discussions among the American decision makers, they are talking about integrated deterrence these days. It's not just military, but different aspects of deterrence against the Chinese aggression against Taiwan. So this is something that has been under discussion. But I think the assumption is right. China is much more powerful economically, and therefore it is going to be much more difficult to impose economic sanctions against China. But another factor is look at the weakness of the Chinese economy these days. It's not the old China anymore, old China 2, 3, 4 years ago anymore. If you look at the Chinese growth rate these years, it's slowing down significantly. And when the Chinese government face a situation that its economy is slowing down, I think it's going to be more vulnerable to the Western economic sanctions.
Next on GPS, I'll ask the question on everyone's mind. If China were to invade Taiwan, do you expect the United States to come to your rescue? The answer in a moment. We are back here on GPS with more of my interview with Taiwan's Foreign Minister, Joseph Wu, amid fears that China may invade the island. So let me ask you point blank, if China were to invade Taiwan, do you expect the United States to come to your rescue?
That is not a question for me to answer. But I can tell you that the people here in Taiwan are ready and prepared to defend ourselves. We are asking the United States and other governments to provide Taiwan with necessary defensive articles so that we are able to defend ourselves. And we are discussing with the United States and other like-minded countries how we can better defend ourselves. Give us something for us to defend ourselves. And speak out in support for Taiwan so that we feel that we are not alone in fighting for ourselves. Unfortunately, I will tell you that the United States, Japan, Australia, European countries, Canada, they have been showing support for Taiwan. So this is something that we can count on. When we are engaged in conflict, unfortunately, if we have to, with China, we can count on all these like-minded countries to speak out in support of Taiwan.
Do you feel the Biden administration, particularly in light of Ukraine, is providing you with the kind of moral and material support that you want?
Yes, indeed. Before and after the war in Ukraine started on February 24th, we have been engaging in the very close contact and discussions with the United States. Of course, we are answering the call of the United States and other like-minded countries how to act together with the democracies against authoritarianism's expansionism. And therefore, we join the condemnation, we join the sanctions, we do whatever we can to support the Ukrainian people. And I think this has been seen. And right after the war erupted, on 24th of February, the Biden administration sent a very powerful team to come to Taiwan and speak with us. And what they want to do is to reassure the Taiwanese people that U.S. support to Taiwan is rock solid.
President of China says Taiwan is part of China. It's in the Chinese People's Republic of China's constitution that China and Taiwan are one country. Does China have a legitimate claim with regard to unification?
They can continue to say it, but they are running against the reality and the desire of the Taiwanese people. The Chinese government have been claiming lots of different things. For example, they're claiming East China Sea, Taiwan, South China Sea, and parts of India, and etc. But if it is not in line with the status quo, I think their claims are not only useless, but can also be very dangerous. If you look at the war in Ukraine, that's the Russian proclamation that Ukraine should be part of Russia. And Russia wants to rejuvenate the national glory. It's very similar to what China has been saying. And therefore, the Chinese claims can be very dangerous, especially when the Chinese government continue to say that Taiwan is part of us. And we want to use military force against Taiwan if necessary. So these can be a prelude to an aggression. So this is something that we need to look very carefully and try to make a stop before it's too late. The only way to go is for the two sides to talk and see how the two sides can live in a peaceful way. And our president has been saying in a very public way for a long time that we want to talk with China to see whether there's any difference between the two so that we can live peacefully with each other. But China cannot just impose a precondition on us and saying that we have to accept that we are part of them before they want to talk to Taiwan. And I think for a practical reason, if we say we are part of them, why do we need to negotiate anymore? And of course, we are not part of them.
Mr. Foreign Minister, it's been a pleasure. It's been an honor talking to you.
Thank you very much, Farid. Thank you. Thank you.
Next on GPS, switching to clean energy would not only help save the planet, it would also work to undermine the power of petrostates like Russia. But it could lead to a new dependence
on China. How? Find out when we come back. Now for the last look. Russia's war in Ukraine has demonstrated that our dependence on oil and gas creates not just an environmental crisis, but a security crisis. It gives money and leverage to petrostates like Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Clean energy would seem to solve both problems, but clean doesn't necessarily translate into homegrown. As Gerald Seib warns in the Wall Street Journal, Western nations could merely replace their one-time dependence on foreign oil and gas sources with a new dependence on China, and I would add other countries, for the critical minerals needed to produce electric vehicles and other renewable energy technologies. The biggest components of these technologies are steel and aluminum, but those are easy to get. The concern, as one of my producers wrote for CNN.com last year, is about more specialized materials: copper, cobalt, lithium, manganese, and many more. A recent study by the International Energy Agency looked at how much of those minerals are used in different electricity sources. For 1 megawatt of capacity, enough to power over 800 American homes, a natural gas plant takes about 1,000 kilograms of minerals to construct. For a coal plant, it's about 2,500 kilograms. For a megawatt of solar power, the fuel is free, of course, but the panels take almost 7,000 kilograms of minerals. Onshore wind takes about 10,000 kilograms. Offshore, more than 15,000. Keep in mind, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, so you have to build extra solar panels and wind turbines to replace a fossil fuel plant. When it comes to transportation, the average gas-powered car contains about 35 kilograms of scarce metals, mostly copper and manganese. Electric cars not only need double of those two elements, but also large quantities of lithium, nickel, cobalt, and graphite, over 200 kilograms in total. Like oil, these minerals are distributed unevenly across the globe and not always in ideal locations. 70% of the world's cobalt is mined in the war-torn and corrupt Democratic Republic of Congo. The next biggest producer is Russia. China presents an even greater challenge. It extracts a majority of the world's graphite and rare earth elements, such as neodymium, that are used for magnets inside wind turbines and electric vehicles. And regardless of whether a particular mineral is located in China, the Chinese have bought up supplies and dominate the processing of many minerals. The minerals industry isn't as popular as renewable energy, particularly on the left. There are real environmental hazards. But if people want to protect the planet from climate change and authoritarian powers, they will have to get on board with new mineral projects. Even the ocean floor cannot be off limits. So far, the process is very slow, according to the IEA. Even after mineral deposits are discovered somewhere, the average time to production is over 15 years. Some of that is planning and construction, but governments can streamline the permitting process to help get these projects moving. In the meantime, there are ways to take some pressure off new supplies. One is to recycle. The FT reports that over the next decade, as much as 20% of the metals for new electric car batteries could be salvaged from spent batteries and other items like old building material and discarded electronics. We should also invest in research to reduce our reliance on precious substances. A Boston startup claimed a breakthrough last year in creating an iron-air battery. This would not only hold a longer charge than the standard lithium-ion battery, the materials would be a lot easier to get. Iron and air aren't exactly hard to come by. The West is waking up to this problem. Last year's bipartisan infrastructure bill allocated several $billion to the production and recycling of critical minerals in the U.S. It also moved to cut red tape for mining on federal land. Recently, President Biden invoked the Defense Production Act to unlock more funds for mineral projects, though his regulators have also stood in the way of some mines. This will have to remain a priority for years and years to come. For the sake of the planet and international security, we will need to dig deep, quite literally. Thanks to all of you for being part of my program this week. I will see you next week. Don't forget, if you miss a show, go to cnn.com/Fareed for a link to my iTunes podcast.
Hey, I'm Brian Salter, live from Washington, D.C. today, and this is Reliable Sources, where we examine the story behind the story. We try to figure out what's reliable. This hour, what are the biggest divides between the press and the public? Pollster Kristen Soltis-Anderson has answers from her fascinating focus groups. Plus, the Twitterverse, it's in Elon Musk's hands, or it likely will be soon. So what does everyone get wrong about Musk? Molly Ball is here to tell us. And here is the Committee to Protect Journalists headline right now. Ukraine war taking a rising toll on reporters. The new president of the group, Jody Ginsburg, will join us here live. But first, finding the serious amid all the spectacle. The White House Correspondents' Dinner spilling across the U.S. Capitol, spawning dozens of related events all weekend long. Remarkable normalcy. President Biden showing us he can deliver a good joke, ripping Fox's hypocrisy, mocking his own low polls, and showing that he does get "Let's Go Brandon." This event always has a bit of a reality TV vibe, especially in years when Democrats control the White House, and especially this time around with Kim Kardashian and Pete Davidson attending as guests of ABC News. But there was no laughing, no gawking, no selfie taking when Biden said this to the press. The room went dead silent during this moment that I want you to watch.
The First Amendment grants a free press extraordinary protection, but with it comes, as many of you know, a very heavy obligation to seek the truth as best you can, not to inflame or entertain, but to illuminate and educate. I know it's tough, and I'm not being solicitous. The industry is changing significantly. There's incredible pressure on you all to deliver heat instead of shed light, because the technology is changing so much. The system is changing. But it matters. No kidding, it matters. The truth matters. American democracy is not a reality show. It's not a reality show.
America's democracy is not a reality show, but is the media guilty of making it seem that way? The night's entertainer, Trevor Noah, had some comments about that too. We'll get to him in a minute. But first, let's analyze Biden and the event with CNN political analyst April Ryan. She's also Washington bureau chief and White House correspondent for the Griot. Molly Ball, national political correspondent for Time magazine. Leanne Caldwell, author of the early 202 newsletter for the Washington Post. She just joined the Post from NBC. And CNN media analyst David Zurwick, also here with us. Welcome, everybody. David, you were watching the dinner at home. Everybody else was in the room. So let's talk about Biden and how he fared. I think there were questions, April, about what message he would want to bring to this event, how serious or how silly he would want to be. What did people in the room think of Biden?
You know, people in the room laughed with him. They thought he was able to laugh at himself. But at the end of the day, he had to mark the moment, and he also had to bring people in to see him, because realistically, this is a president who has low poll numbers leading into a midterm that's very critical. But as far as laughing at himself, he was able to do that. But as far as also putting exclamation a mark on the moment, a moment of crises, a moment of seriousness domestically and with foreign policy and foreign issues, I think he hit the ball out of the park last night.
That's why all the reality show stuff kind of paused, because there was such a serious conversation from both Biden and Noah about the state of democracy. Now, to me, it felt different than in past years, pre-COVID, pre-Trump even. To me, it felt like this was President Biden trying to talk about democracy versus autocracy, which is, David, one of his favorite themes.
It is. It's from the time he announced his candidacy, he's been saying that, and it's one of his keenest insights. And people kind of ignored it. Now we see what's going on. I think he really did. With the key phrase was that you just had up there: democracy is not a reality show. That's what's wrong with the culture.
But don't we treat it like that? Aren't we part of the problem?
I try not to, and I think you try not to on this show. A lot of us do, but a lot of people don't. That's the problem. Okay. That's the other problem with it.
Yeah. Trevor Noah, I thought, had a fantastic media critique that he left hanging in the air at the end of his address. So let's go ahead and show that as well.
If Russian journalists who are losing their livelihoods, as you were talking about, Steve, and their freedom for daring to report on what their own government is doing, if they had the freedom to write any words, to show any stories, or to ask any questions, if they had basically what you have, would they be using it in the same way that you do? Ask yourself that question every day, because you have one of the most important roles in the world.
I know he's just a comedian, and I know it's easier to mock news than make news, but Molly, I think he's trying to say, hey, y'all are not using your freedoms as effectively as you should.
Yeah, you know, the lecture always comes wrapped in a sort of compliment
The lecture,
sandwich, right? And everybody in the media loves being lectured by a comedian. But you know, the people in that room, most of the people who are members of the association, who are White House correspondents, do take our jobs very seriously, you know. And it was interesting, you know, thinking about, it's almost the same challenge that Biden faces with his entire presidency, trying to signal the return to normalcy at the same time as you acknowledge that this is a once-in-a-lifetime moment. This is a different moment, coming out of COVID and trying to manage the symbolism of that, trying to send the message to America about how to be safe, but also, you know, go on with life, trying to return to normalcy while also acknowledging these unprecedented challenges and coming out of the Trump years, being the president who returns the dinner to that status quo ante. How do you make that seem normal while also recognizing how different it is?
Right. For example, Biden saying, you're not the enemy of the people, you're the guardians of the truth. I don't think he's going to persuade anyone about that, but it's still important that presidents say it. Is that true, Leanne?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the most poignant things that the president said, it seemed to be not part of the prompter, but before he took it to Trevor Noah, he said, you can say whatever you want about me, and unlike in Russia, you will not be arrested. And so, and that was a moment as well that there's not only the, not crisis, but the issues happening domestically and the divisions among the public and their interpretations and their opinion of the press, but also what's happening internationally as well, and what is happening that it's very difficult for even Western journalists to report from Russia.
Absolutely. Let's point out that when the event organizers had a tribute to the journalists who've been killed in Ukraine, April, you pointed out, who applauded first? Tell viewers what you saw.
The President of the United States rose to his feet and started a slow clap. That
and he was the first to stand up in the entire room.
After that very sober moment of journalists watching the journalists who have died in that war in Ukraine, Russia warring on Ukraine. And he began the clapping.
He led it.
He led the clapping, and he stood up, and everyone in that room, 2,600 people stood up. And it took him to lead that. And that's unfortunate that people don't see that when we report, you know, we're trying to bring you real-time news, trying to help you understand what is going on in the world. As people try to critique the news, you're always watching us to see what's happened. Let's remember that. But at the same time, we are I'm talking here as White House correspondents now, we're the first line of questioning an American president. And you always look to us to find out. And when something happens, when you have a president or when you have Vladimir Putin warring on people, warring on journalists, there's a problem. And the President of the United States began that moment last night that reverberated in that room. It was one of the most poignant moments of the evening.
Yeah, making clear the importance of press freedom around the world, in Ukraine and Russia, where there really isn't any right now. And then, Leanne, you were happy to be at a table that was significant. There was a call out for Austin Tice, the journalist who went missing in Syria about a decade ago. His family was in the room, and there was a moment about Austin Tice. Tell us about where you were sitting and what that resonated with.
Yeah, so Deborah Tice, his mother, was a guest of the Washington Post, and so she was at my table, and she said that this week of meetings is the most meetings that she has been able to have about her son in Washington in a very long time.
Wow.
She said in part because of Trevor Noah and drawing attention to him. And so she has him to thank. And she said that she wanted to get in touch with his people to be able to thank him. And she said that it has been just a very long slog, really hard to get people to listen to her.
And I believe Biden said from the stage, I want to meet with you.
Yes.
So that seems significant as well. But we're going to talk to the head of the Committee about Journalists a little bit later this hour about those threats around the world. I do want to ask you, April, about the moment, if folks who watched last night, they saw a standing ovation for you. And recognition of you. Was it in April that you became, it was in January that you, April, became the longest serving black female White House correspondent in history. Here's the moment. Tell us what this was like for you.
Oh, I'm getting chills as you show this. I am the longest serving black woman journalist to ever cover the White House, 25 years. Wendell Goler, the late Wendell Goler, is the longest serving at 28. And working with the griot, we're going to pass that record. But as the association and that beautiful program they had last night, how they lifted up the names of Ethel Payne and Alice Dunnigan, two of the first black reporters to cover the White House and be credentialed, and the racism, the gender hate they received, that in some cases mirrored what I saw a few years ago. It was eerily familiar, and for that room, 2,600 people to stand. I had a Congresswoman Frederica Wilson called me this morning, and she said, April, that room was not just at the African American Museum of History and Culture where we had our party last night. She said that was a room filled with people, white people, who saw and celebrated you. That was a poignant moment. That was a poignant moment, and I'll never forget it. And I thank Gayle King, my friend, for doing that. It still brings tears to my eyes.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I don't want anybody to go. We've got so much more to talk about. Let's take a quick break. Much more with the panel in just a moment. Molly's new cover story for Time Magazine is all about Elon Musk and what he's going to do with Twitter. What does he really believe? We're going to get into that. Plus, we're speaking with a disinformation expert on the example that Ukraine has set in its fight against Russian disinformation. Can that be replicated? A lot more coming up. We're just getting started. Elon Musk, he's tweeting through it. You know, right now, sharing his every stray thought as he prepares to take over Twitter. He says he wants to protect the public square by taking the company private. This deal could close in just a few months. So what does Elon Musk really believe? Why does he really want to own this powerful communications platform? Let's talk about it again. April Ryan, Molly Ball, David Zerwick, Leanne Caldwell, all back with me here at the table. Molly, you wrote the cover story for Time this week titled, "What Everyone Gets Wrong About Elon Musk." So tell us.
Yeah, well, you know, I got to know Elon Musk and spent some time with him when I was reporting our profile of him as Person of the Year back in December. And when he talks about politics, it tends to be very much in this sort of tech bro kind of way of, oh, I don't agree with either party, right? He doesn't have traditional political allegiances. So it's been interesting to see, you know, his two missions in life are, number one, to save the climate, and number two, to get humanity to Mars. And so it's very interesting to see him get coded as a sort of right-wing billionaire just because of the way he's moved on the speech issue. Now, it's very clear that he has moved right on the speech issue, and he basically said that this week. But I think people are reading a lot of things into his intentions that he hasn't actually said. And what he has said, though, is that he views this as another important problem facing humanity, right? And if you think about it, I think a lot of people would agree with that Twitter and social media and the toxicity and everything that happens there is a big problem for American democracy. And so it seems that Elon Musk has also come to that conclusion and decided he can be the one to fix it. Now, how he's going to do that, I think, remains to be seen.
And that's the problem right there. We need to find clarity at this moment about controls. What will be kept? What will be erased? Will some politicians who created misinformation be allowed back on, etc.? Twitter has now become a platform where there is misinformation and in some cases danger, and he has got to bring clarity to what he plans to do, especially as many of us use the platform, have been targeted on the platform. There's so many pieces out there in the hinterlands, maybe lying out in Mars, that we need to find out about, you know?
Right, there's more questions than answers right now. Leanne, what questions do you have?
Well, I just want to know if he's going to add an edit button.
That's a good one. That's a good one. That's a very good one. Yeah.
But it's been, you know, speech and Twitter especially, it's been part of the political discourse now. It's now become a cultural issue, a wedge issue politically, not only in Congress, but in the public as well. So it's going to be an interesting journey.
Are you pro or con Elon Musk?
No, I think there's a bigger problem that when we focus on the personalities of people like Elon Musk and people say, oh, I think Elon's thinking this or that. There's a bigger problem here about how we are going to control the channels of communication in this country. In 1927, we had the Radio Act. 1934, the Communications Act. Congress stepped in. We made rules. FCC wasn't great, but it's still regulating the broadcast industry. You can't use vulgar language. You can't do all these things with speech. We gave over our what amounts to our airwaves or our internet waves to Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. And we are in so much trouble because those guys believe in making money. We've already seen that with the 2016 election and Zuckerberg when he was taking rubles for ads from Russia and saying, oh, I think it's crazy to think they had any influence on this election. Musk is the same. Musk doesn't want it. You know, he's upset with the SEC, tried to, how dare they question him? You know what I'm saying? This is dangerous. We can't think anymore in this country. We don't have people, no, I'm serious, we don't have people in Congress who can make regulations that can make it work. I think we can look to the Western countries in Europe for how they are trying to limit it. But you need controls on this. You need regulation. You cannot let these guys control discourse in this country or we are headed to hell. We are there. Trump opened the gates of hell and now they're chasing us down.
Wait, we gotta get Molly's reaction because this is you've been covering this for days.
Oh, well, I'm not here to defend, you know, Elon Musk. But look, I mean, one of the things he said he wants to do that has been pointed to by some experts as something that could improve discourse on the platform is to authenticate people, right? Get rid of what he calls the spam bots, try to make people have real identities. Now, would that go a long way in stopping some of the targeting, some of the harassment? I don't know. But a lot of the changes that he's talking about making the algorithm transparent, right? Giving people access to the sort of source code that controls what can and can't be seen. That's another thing that people like Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, have said could go a long way in actually cleaning this up in a systemic way, because the way it's done now, where it's individual flawed humans with biases trying to make judgment calls in real time on really difficult stuff that we don't actually know, trying to discern the truth or falsehood of individual pieces of information in fast-moving, difficult situations like the 2020 election, that clearly isn't working so great either. So if he has got a way to, change the system in a way that makes discourse better, I think we could all use that.
Let's see what he does. You know who loves this are folks like J.D. Vance. So many right-wing politicians and wannabe politicians are interested in seeing Elon Musk take over Twitter. Let's turn to Vance and the Ohio primary. Leanne, you're covering this. Tuesday is really the start of the midterm primary race, Ohio and Indiana. Ohio is going to be fascinating. Tell us what you're watching with J.D. Vance and his rivals in Ohio.
Yeah, everyone is watching Ohio in part because of Trump's influence in that race. He endorsed J.D. Vance recently. J.D. Vance has no political experience. And since then, J.D. Vance, according to one or two polls, has moved up in the polls, perhaps even taken a slight lead, including against Josh Mandel, who's the more conservative, Christian conservative candidate who people like Senator Ted Cruz are behind. And so everyone is watching this race to see if Trump continues to have influence in the party, not only with his endorsements, but if he can actually get voters to follow his lead. I've been talking to Republicans for many months about this, and this is also a question they have too, Republican operatives in D.C. And so it's not just us that are going to be watching it, it's also people in the Republican ecosphere too.
And what does Vance's evolution tell you about the state of the GOP? He was a CNN commentator. And now he's Tucker Carlson's favorite.
Right, and he was anti-Trump. He said some very tough things against the president, well, not yet president, in 2016, even threatening to vote for Hillary Clinton. And so if this is if Trump and J.D. Vance are able to turn around Republican primary voters in this race and J.D. Vance wins, it maybe perhaps shows that Trump does have some hold still on the Republican Party.
Right. Well, but is J.D. Vance desperate, or is he actually looking at the ideology, of what Trump says? And that's the question in this very working class state that is trying to figure out its way in the midst of a possible impending recession, et cetera.
Right. I mean, I like this Washington Post headline saying, in once mainstream Ohio, moderates struggle against pro-Trump rivals, right? It's about a seismic shift in this state. And we will get results, hopefully Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, we will know. David, I mentioned Tucker Carlson. Have you read the big New York Times front page story today? This is the first in a three-part series from the Times called American Nationalist, examining Carlson and his evolution over time. Basically, this is straight up. This says he has the most racist show in the history of cable news.
Boy, there might be some minor channels we don't know about, but he's right up there. I mean, and no one has ever had the kind of audience he has and has preached the kind of racism he preaches. I would say that's absolutely certain. I think the piece in the Times did a very good job early on of contextualizing him. With Father Coughlin, the 1930s, virulent anti-Semite on radio out of Detroit, who had a huge audience. I mean, this was a rival to Roosevelt in those eras. There is a tradition here, but Tucker Carlson, and I'll tell you what, you can't separate Tucker Carlson from Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch allows this stuff to go out over his airways. Pardon?
And his son.
Oh, so absolutely, his son. I remember in 2018 when he said immigrants make us poorer and dirtier. We were doing a show about that, and we were denouncing it, and he was saying, "Oh, they're denying me my freedom of speech and my First Amendment rights by this advertiser boycott." I mean, he goes from ugly aggressor attacking vulnerable minorities, and then as soon as it's punched back, he then plays the victim card in the aggrieved American. And it works with his audience. It works with his audience. But it's so scary. He has tremendous power. The right is powerful because it has him as a voice in the rest of the Fox primetime lineup.
Racist entertainment.
Yes.
He makes believable.
Yes, yes.
I'd love to talk to him and see what he says to all this, but yeah, that's going to happen. To the panel, thank you very much. Let's take a quick break and come back in a moment with GOP pollster Kristen Soltis-Anderson, talking about disconnects between the news coverage, what the D.C. media focuses on, versus what Americans might care about more. We'll be right back. Let's have a frank conversation about the disconnects between the press and the public. While the public lives in the world, the press maybe lives within a bubble within that world. But it's so important for the news media to examine the bubbles that it's in and to try to burst those and connect with people more often in different ways. Let me show you one way I think that's really important to do that. These focus groups, including ones recently organized by the New York Times, the results have been going viral. These articles have been getting so much attention because they've been speaking with Americans in different groups for different reasons about different topics and getting to the heart of how Americans feel. One of the organizers of these focus groups is Kristen Soltis Anderson. She's a GOP pollster and strategist, now also a CNN political commentator, co-founder of Echelon Insights. She's here with me in Washington. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Brian.
I've been wanting to talk to you for a while about these focus groups you're doing, because every time you speak with another group of voters, I learn something new. What have you learned so far about disconnects between the public and the press, between the media and the public?
I've learned that a lot of Americans are very focused on the challenges they're facing in their own lives, and that's not always exactly what they're seeing covered in the media. So for instance, the very first focus group we did for the New York Times, I was talking to Republican voters about January 6th. And in those focus groups, we found that, for many of those Republicans, they were horrified by what they had seen on the television, but at the same time hadn't been following the sort of beat by beat of, well, who texted whom and which congressman from where was sending texts to Mark Meadows. Many of them were surprised to learn that, for instance, Laura Ingraham had been texting with, Mark Meadows on the day saying, hey, you got to call this off. That there are just lots of little details that I think the news media focuses on, and it's big breaking news, it's everything. But for your average voter, they're focused on what's going on in their own lives much more so than the comings and goings of characters in these stories that I think journalists view as very important, but just don't seem connected to what's going on in people's lives.
But is the argument then not to write the story? I mean, look, I helped write one of the stories this week about the 1-6 text. I thought it was fascinating. Is the argument not to write those stories, or is it about proportionality or something?
I think it's about proportionality. I think it's important for the news media to dig in, find information, report on what's out there. But I do think that there's a balance of, is it the top breaking story that it turns out that a Pennsylvania congressman texted the White House chief of staff something that we probably all could guess he was texting, that he didn't believe the results of the election, But you have gas prices that are around $4. You have all sorts of challenges that your average American is facing. They're worried about immigration. They're worried about crime. They're worried about the ability to make ends meet. And those are the sorts of things where if they feel they're not getting coverage from a certain media source on the things that they're worried about, they'll go find it somewhere else.
Does that mean that Republican narratives are beating Democratic narratives? Because when I hear you say they're worried about crime, I kind of hear a Republican narrative.
Well, I don't think being concerned about crime is necessarily a Republican narrative. I think a lot of swing voters would push back against that.
I think right-wing media talks about that story a lot. Maybe that's what I mean.
Well, I think right-wing media does, but I think this is a moment where, at least in the research I'm seeing, swing voters in the middle, their priorities look a little more like the priorities of Republican voters. I think back in 2018, I would have said the opposite. You had swing voters in the middle who were really worried about things like pre-existing conditions, health care. They didn't like Donald Trump very much. And so in 2018, those swing voters probably looked a little more like Democrats in terms of their priority. But this year for the midterms, it's the opposite.
I thought Trevor Noah's best joke last night, I don't have the clip, but I'm going to read it. He said, ever since you came into office, President Biden, things are looking up. Gas is up, rent is up, food is up. Going after him on inflation, going after him on, frankly, stuff that Biden may have limited control over. But that is the mood of the country in the United States. Things are pricier, things are more expensive, and it's a hard time. Now, how do we make, in the press, how do we make that a daily important story? How do we make that a top story every day to show that we are in touch with what the public cares about?
Well, I think a lot of the public would like to know a little bit more about what's causing this. And actually, that's the sort of thing that I think Democrats wouldn't be as upset about talking about, because in their view, they feel they're being unfairly blamed. But I think a lot of Americans, they walk into a grocery store and they don't understand why chicken breasts cost as much as they do. I think those kinds of stories are very much connected with where your average American is. It may not be as sexy and breaking news, but I do think that that's the kind of thing that Americans are very curious about because it's hurting them at home.
Right, definitely. So this dinner, this entire D.C. weekend, the reason I'm here in D.C. When average Americans see this, are they repulsed? How do you think it reads to the public at large?
I think most of the public is not necessarily repulsed. I actually think that in some ways...
Or doesn't even hear about it or care at all.
The people who are the most sort of jaundiced about the relationship between the press and Washington are also the ones least likely to be, sort of the COVID concerned. So I think there's a couple different reasons why someone might sort of give a little side eye to the dinner. Okay. But in general, the audience for the dinner is, for the most part, the roughly 4,000 to 5,000 people who get a joke about Axios being playbook without the birthdays, right? The vast majority of Americans are not going to get that joke, and that's fine because they're not the audience.
Okay. That's actually better.
Okay.
Yeah, right. There was a Pew poll, a data point from Pew in 2020 that I wanted to ask you about. This was a couple years ago, but it said 75% of U.S. adults believe it is possible to improve the level of confidence that Americans have in the news. Should I feel optimistic or pessimistic about that number? I mean, that means 25% have given up.
Well, I think you should feel optimistic about that number. 75% in any poll these days, with things being so polarized, is pretty good news. But the other thing to bear in mind from that poll is you had 63% of Americans saying that they think it's good for people to be skeptical of the news. I know a lot of times we can say, look, is it this crisis that there's this decline in trust in the news media? I do worry not so much that people are distrusting of the news, but rather that they are trusting of the wrong sources. That's actually something that would concern me more. But most Americans don't view distrust or skepticism of the news as a bad thing that needs to be fixed. They view that as a feature, not a bug.
It's a great point. Kristen, thank you for coming on.
Thank you,
Great
Brian.
to see you. After the break here, what is this Disinformation Governance Board about? We're going to get into the Biden administration's new effort, they say, to combat disinformation and what it could mean, and also how it's linked to the ongoing war in Ukraine. In the ongoing war with Russia, Ukraine has managed to move the needle in the battle against disinformation, with President Volodymyr Zelensky and other high-ranking officials successfully calling on tech companies to challenge and to minimize, at least, Russia's cyber propaganda. Let's talk about this and more with Maura Whalen. She's the Director of Democracy and Technology with the nonprofit National Democratic Institute. Great to see you. Thanks for coming over.
Thanks for having me.
You say that in Ukraine, we have seen the rules of conflict changing. And in what ways?
Well, we're really seeing the internet be a front in this war, and Ukraine is really stepping up and showing us something brand new we haven't seen. We've come a long way from 2014 when we talked about little green men to really looking at the internet as a place where they can press their advantage, where they can mobilize both Europe, a lot of European governments, the United States, as well as tech companies to help them get their message out and communicate what's actually happening inside of the country.
What's an example of disinformation pushed by Russia that Ukraine's actually been able to neutralize or change? Like, is there a specific example you would point to as a great one?
Probably the greatest example is the limiting of the reach of RT and shutting down RT both in Ukraine but also in the European Union. That's probably been the greatest example, and here in the United States, undermining their finance to limit the spread of Russia today. And that really shows us how that mobilization of the market, of governments working together, can really change the dynamic of how we see war play out in our family rooms as we watch it play out on a battlefield.
Right, in our family rooms, yeah. Here in the U.S., there's been an uproar in recent days about the Department of Homeland Security setting up what they call a Disinformation Governance Board. This has been mostly a Fox World story. It could come up earlier today on CNN State of the Union, but I don't think people know what it is and what it isn't. And there's just been a lot of right-wing uproar without knowing what it is. So are you aware of this at all? What is this all about?
Aware of it, and I think the first thing is that it's a board, exactly as we say. It is meant to bring together people to coordinate a lot of the efforts inside of DHS. That means law enforcement, that means emergency services like FEMA. They've all been doing counter-disinformation efforts for a while to give us accurate information about human rights abuses, but also about disasters and where people can get assistance. So coordinating that activity, making it speak with one voice, and being a stronger advocate to tech companies and engaging the public and academia, that's really what they're after.
But hold on, that sounds like common sense. But when I Google this, all I see is like Joe Biden's Ministry of Truth, and they're going to, there's this incredible backlash to something that sounds like basic government bureaucracy.
It is basic government bureaucracy, and around the world what we're asking for governments to do is to step up more and to play a bigger role in advocating for people. The big litmus test is civil society included? Is the media included? And so far everything we've heard about the board, which is new and just started, shows us that that is the intention, is to be fully transparent and to demand more from our government in terms of how they protect us from disinformation and enable us to have information that protects our country and advances our ability to survive in a major incident, for instance.
There's also an announcement from the State Department this week about the Declaration for the Future of the Internet. What is that?
I think it's a great step forward. What we saw in the announcement was more than 50 governments coming together to reaffirm a commitment to free expression and advancing human rights as a component and the internet as a human right. And it wasn't just the likes of Europe and the United States that we typically see, but we heard from Marshall Islands, we heard from Ukraine, talking about how important it is to view access to the internet and the ability to express your opinions as a human right. And so we're seeing democracies around the world really join together and reaffirm that this is a component in advancing democracy.
Do you think the messages about democracy, the messages that President Biden expressed last night at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, is it getting through? Is it permeating to the people who actually need to hear it? Or is it becoming this like left-right issue where, you know, conservatives in the U.S. hear the word democracy and they think liberals are just using it as a wedge against them?
I think the ability for us to have that conversation out here in the public is what makes us a democracy.
Fair, okay.
I do think we are making progress on that front, and we are, you know, it's really heartening to see this administration through the Summit for Democracy and other activities reaffirm democracy as a front and center issue as part of our national security agenda. And, you know, we fully support that. And I think last night set a tone where we answered a moment where we recognize that democracy is a fragile thing and takes all of us and takes that debate and the importance of satire and the importance of being able to have an opinion about the president and be fine.
And be fine. And I think probably a lot of Americans took that for granted for a long time. And right now we're being reminded not to.
Yeah, and around the world, this is something that people fight for every day. And at NDI, we try to help people do that. But it's a full-time job, and democracy is under assault. So more affirmations like that, not only from President Biden, but from global leaders, is really necessary.
That's a great point. I had a tweet from a viewer a few minutes ago saying, because I was kind of saying, yeah, you know, Trump said the press, Biden said the press is not the enemy of the people, they're the guardians of truth. Right, he was giving a retort to Trump. And I said, well, okay, but no one's going to be persuaded by that. And one of my favorite viewers, Alex, tweeted, it actually does matter. It does matter when the president repeats that over and over again. Repeating the truth matters in the same way that Trump lying over and over again mattered. So it's important to use the power of the pulpit to defend basic democratic principles.
And I think you made a great point that people take it for granted unless they see it every day. But we just heard in a previous show about the importance of this issue in Taiwan, about the importance of this issue in Hong Kong. There are activists who are put in jail every day. The Nobel Peace Prize, Maria Ressa, you know, couldn't travel to be with us this week at Madeleine Albright's funeral, who was a founder of our organization, because of the limits put on her as a member of the press and what she's facing. So this isn't an abstract issue. It's something that here in the United States we really enjoy, but around the world is very real to democratic activists, to journalists, and something that we have to keep reminding people of every day. And most importantly, asking tech companies to help us to make them realize that as far as a dictator is concerned, they're on our side. So what we need is more proactive activity from the likes of major tech companies to engage in this conversation and to help enable the voices of those who don't have a level playing field in the countries in which they're operating.
Maura, thank you so much. Great
Thank you very much.
We're going to stay on this theme in just a moment with the new president of the Committee to Protect Journalists, her first interview about her priorities for press freedom around the world. This year to date, at least 17 journalists have been killed on the job, and the true total is even higher. Groups like the Committee to Protect Journalists keep track of this, and they try to hold enemies of press freedom accountable. With us now is the new president of the group, Jody Ginsburg. Jody, welcome, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
We've been covering the death toll in Ukraine, reporters killed on the job, but this is a problem even beyond war zones.
Absolutely. I mean, the death toll in Ukraine is at least 7 journalists so far since the conflict started in late February. What's concerning about the situation for press freedom at the moment is not just the risk to journalists in war zones. There's always been risks to journalists reporting war. It is a risky profession when you're reporting on conflict. There's a couple of things that are really concerning about the conflict in particular in Ukraine is that journalists also appear to be targeted, which is something new. Often having the word press on your back or on your front was seen as a form of protection. Now there's a concern that it makes you an actual target. And the second thing is the rising threats to journalists outside of war zones. This year alone, CPJ has confirmed 3 murders of journalists in Mexico alone, and the total may be higher, it may be 7, which would put it at the same level as the conflict in Ukraine. That's unimaginable in a country that is a democracy, that is not at war. Those are journalists in local context reporting on local issues like corruption who are being killed for their work.
What are your priorities now as the new president of CPJ to try to both raise awareness of this and stop it?
My priorities will be to continue the great work CPJ has done in documenting these attacks on the press, raising awareness about those threats, particularly, I think, in democracies. We need to be aware that these threats to journalists are not somewhere far away. They're not all happening in authoritarian regimes. They're happening right here in the United States, in the UK, in Europe. I think you pointed out in your newsletter recently an attack, a verbal attack by a Los Angeles sheriff, right, on a journalist.
Yeah, it was crazy. He implied he was going to investigate her for breaking news about him.
For doing her job. And I think we need to be really clear that it is the job of journalists to hold those in power, those in authority to account. And that's our role. And we should not be criminalized. We should not be attacked. We should not be jailed for holding those in power to account for doing our jobs.
And where do people go when they want to help CPJ?
They go to cpj.org.
Well, that was easy.
It's really easy. And one of the things I think we can really do, and what I really want to do, is to help people understand. One of your previous guests talked about this. I want to really help people understand that journalism is a public good. Journalists are not some rarefied individuals doing something that is not connected to our day-to-day. We heard from
right, they're just members of the people, the public, like the rest of us.
They're members of the public, like the rest of us,
right,
whose work is to help us live our best lives, to make sure that we can do our jobs. And that's what I want to really do, is help people understand that and see it as a positive for everyone.
It's a great way to put it. Jody, thank you so much. Nice
You're
talking
welcome.
with you. And thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you this time next week for much more Reliable Sources.
It is a tale of two cities on Merseyside this season. Liverpool could win it all and Everton could be relegated. A massive test for the Blues today and a point to prove for their manager. Also on World Sport, history made in boxing and a fight that lived up to the hype. Ireland's Katie Taylor says it was the best night of her career. And we're also catching up with the brave women of the Afghanistan women's football team. A big win for them today, but it's been a difficult road since their evacuation from Kabul. Hello there and welcome to World Sport. We're coming to you live from CNN Center. I'm Don Riddell. Real Madrid are no strangers to winning the biggest prizes in football, but that doesn't stop them celebrating when they do. This weekend, Real clinched their 35th La Liga title, extending their record number of domestic trophies, and they wasted no time in heading to their traditional party spot, the Greek goddess Cibeles. Around 150,000 fans flocked to the famous fountain in the center of town after their 4-0 thrashing of Espanyol at the Bernabeu Stadium. It's the first time they've been able to celebrate with their supporters since the start of the pandemic. It was a particularly special day for Carlo Ancelotti, who's now completed an extraordinary set of trophies as a manager. The 62-year-old is now the first manager to win a title in all 5 of Europe's main top-flight leagues. Ancelotti, a distinguished and decorated former player too, of course, winning the Serie A crown in Italy with Milan in 2004 as manager of the Rossoneri, and then 6 years later he captured the Premier League in England with Chelsea. In 2013, he bagged the Ligue 1 crown with PSG in France. Then it was the Bundesliga with Bayern Munich in Germany. And now 5 years after that, his team are the champions of Spain. Ancelotti also one of just 3 managers to have won the Champions League 3 times, and he might yet do it again this season. One of his former clubs, AC Milan, is in contention to win another Scudetto this year. It's been quite a while for the Rossoneri. A huge win for them on Sunday against Fiorentina, just the 1 goal in it. A very well taken strike from Rafael Leao 8 minutes from time, ensuring that Milan's destiny remains in their own hands this season. And Milan lead their bitter rivals Inter Milan by 5 points, but Inter do have a game in hand. However, if Milan can win their last 3 games, then nothing can stop them from clinching their first league title in some 11 years. The race for the Premier League title remains hugely compelling in England. Over the weekend, the top teams both won again, meaning that with just 4 games left to play, Manchester City are still ahead of Liverpool by a single point. Man City played the late game on Saturday, and it could have been tricky against a Leeds United team fighting to stay in the league. But City just destroyed them. Rodri's glancing header there made it 1-0 in the first half. And in the second, Nathan Ake made it 2-0 as Pep Guardiola's men sensed the chance to boost their status in the goal difference column. You never know, that could be crucial in the final standings. Gabriel Jesus made it 3-0. And then another Brazilian put the icing on the cake with a 4th goal deep into stoppage time. This is Fernandinho threading it through from the edge of the area. 4-0 the final score. So the title race now looks like this. City are top on 83 points. Liverpool a point behind in second. Both teams now have big semi-final matches in the Champions League this week. Liverpool, by the way, are still in the hunt for a quadruple of trophies this season. Contrasting fortunes on Merseyside because their City rivals Everton are fighting desperately to stay in the Premier League. A huge game for them on Sunday against Chelsea and a big test for their new manager Frank Lampard. Of course, he was a Chelsea star player and their manager until they pay valuable 3 points. On Sunday, Everton still in the relegation zone, but they are now just 2 points behind Leeds United and they have a game in hand. That win against Chelsea will be a massive morale booster. They might just yet be able to pull themselves out of danger. By the way, Norwich City were officially relegated this weekend. Up next on World Sport, it's a new beginning for the Afghanistan women's football team. In a special report, we'll talk to the players who've realised that a fresh start isn't as easy as you might have thought. Welcome back. An historic night at New York's famous Madison Square Garden has ended with victory for the Irish fighter Katie Taylor. For the first time in its 140-year history, two women headlined a boxing match at the Garden, and Taylor emerged victorious against Amanda Serrano, winning on a split decision to remain undefeated. It is rare in boxing that promoters are able to make a fight with two athletes at the height of their powers, but it happened here. Taylor and Serrano are the best two pound-for-pound fighters in the world. So this wasn't just a big deal for the women's game, it was special for the sport as a whole. Taylor described it as the best night of her career, and the win means that the former Olympic champion is still in possession of her WBA, IBF, WBO and WBC lightweight titles, and the 33-year-old now boasts a 21-0 record with 6 knockouts.
The packed stadium, unbelievable stuff. Was absolutely special moment. The best night of my career for sure. I wasn't sure if anything could reach my Olympic gold medal moment, but tonight was absolutely the best moment of my career.
It's been 8 months now since players from the Afghanistan women's football team were airlifted to safety after the fall of Kabul. Many of the squad found themselves in Melbourne, Australia, where they've been starting new lives. Earlier on Sunday, they played their first home game in Victoria State's League 4, and it was a pretty joyous occasion. They won 10-0. But as I discovered recently, nothing has been straightforward for this brave group of women. It's a new beginning for the Afghanistan women's football team. When the Taliban took over their country last August, these players had to burn their old shirts and conceal their identities in order to flee the country. Back then, they had no idea what the future would hold.
We've been through with so many challenges on that days that we were in airport. It was like a matter of life and death. So you didn't know that you will be alive or not. And for guarantee, you will be dead soon.
Details about their dramatic escape are still emerging, and there was no guarantee they would make it.
One of the pupils said that, oh look, there is an Afghanistan woman national player, and she was trying to hide herself from Taliban, and that was really such hard days for all of us.
The players' evacuation was the result of a frantic but coordinated international effort. Hayley Carter, who was recently reunited with the team, had previously coached the players, and she used her connections as a former Marine to facilitate their escape. But it was fraught with danger, a danger realized when a suicide bomber killed around 180 people, including 13 US servicemen and women.
We got our athletes through maybe about 48 hours before that happened. I still struggle with it, thinking about it, especially losing women Marines. And I hope that their families can appreciate that those Marines were involved in getting these young women to safety. I know for a fact that they were. Several of those individuals were.
It is a bittersweet moment in so many ways. The captain, Fatima, chokes up when I asked her to recall the moment her transport plane was airborne, because they were all leaving so much behind.
You have your dreams. You're losing your dreams in a blink, and that was the thing that happened in Afghanistan for not just me, like for so many girls, for so many women.
Many of the players resettled in Australia, and with the help of the Melbourne Victory Football Club, they have started new lives. This was their first game.
I think football has this overriding responsibility to support not only its participants, but show the best in humanity and the best in people. You know, people who pursued the game because they loved it, because it gave them a sense of empowerment, a sense of confidence, self-esteem, and they deserve, you know, whatever the game can offer them.
Not all of the players got out of Afghanistan, and others had to leave family behind. And for all that their story has some positive elements, it is undoubtedly complicated. They're trying to find jobs to support themselves and their families back home, and they're trying to continue their education whilst also playing football twice a week. Desperate circumstances have forced them to start over, but the bonds that united them before are now even stronger.
Afghan women's national team, they play for everyone. They play for every woman, every athlete, every sport, even non-athletes, they represent the women of Afghanistan. And they're a reminder, I think, to women everywhere that, you know, we collectively can do anything that we put our minds to, and we are stronger than others may think.
It remains to be seen whether or not FIFA will allow this team to play international football under the name and the flag of their home country. But because of the Taliban's stance against allowing women to play sports, this will be the only Afghanistan women's football team in the world. But perhaps the only thing that really, truly matters is that they're safe.
I never felt it before, like when I was in Afghanistan, because I was afraid of so many things, about your security, about your family, or about anything else. It is something I found it. That was the thing, I found it here.
Here they accept all kinds of people. They don't ask that, are you Muslim, are you Christian, or anything else. That's such a good thing, and Australians are such a kind people. I love them.
This is an incredible group of women, and if you'd like to read more about their journey and the challenges they're now facing, just head to cnn.com/worldsport. Next up on the show, we're in conversation with the young Premier League star Jarrett Bowen. It is a very entertaining chat, and the next time he gives a referee a hard time, well, he might want to remember this.
I refereed a game once, I forgot to keep the score. And someone asked me what the score was, I said, I don't know. Was you meant to keep count?
Hello again. By the end of this week, we will know the finalists in each of the 3 men's UEFA competitions. That's the Champions League, the Europa League, and the Europa Conference League. To progress into the title match would be a big deal for all of the teams involved, especially West Ham, who'll be away at Eintracht Frankfurt, hoping to overturn a 2-1 deficit from the first leg. One of their big stars this season has been their 25-year-old winger, Jarrett Bowen. So we dispatched our senior sports analyst, Darren Lewis, to try to get to know him better.
Your shirt number's 20, so I've got 20 questions lined up for you. Top 4 in the Premier League or the European final?
European final.
Finish the sentence. If I wasn't a footballer, I'd be a...
farmer.
How many years is it since West Ham were in a European semi-final?
50.
46. Best player in the Premier League?
Mo Salah.
Best player in the world right now?
Mbappe.
Toughest defender you've ever played against?
Cancelo.
Why?
He was horrible to play against. He was so quick, and he's good at defending. I thought he'd just be attack-minded, but defending, he's hard to get past.
Your most talented teammate?
Declan Rice.
Why?
The skills he's got. No one actually sees his skills, and just the way he plays. When you see him day in, day out, you see how good he really is.
Which West Ham player's got the most fantasy football points?
Oh, Antonio?
No.
Me?
Yeah.
Really? I didn't know if it was me or not, because Mick, yeah, I thought it might have been Mick.
What's your favourite holiday destination?
Well, I went to Mykonos. That was nice. I enjoyed that. Yeah, probably there.
What's the most used app on your phone?
Oh, TikTok. But I don't have an account. I'm not posting anything. I'm just, just hiding behind and just watching TikTok. I don't do any of the dances or anything. None of that.
What was your first job?
Referee.
Really?
Yeah. I was a ref at like 14. I think my mum sent me on a course, and I used to get £15 a game, £20 a game.
Wow.
But I refereed a game once and I forgot to keep the score. And someone asked me what the score was. I said, I don't know. Was you meant to keep count? But yeah, I done that. And then after that, I just didn't do it. So yeah, referee.
What's your favourite goal of all time?
Probably my first professional goal of Hereford. Yeah, being a Hereford fan and scoring in front of the Hereford end, the Meadow end.
First footballing memory?
Me wearing a pair of glasses, because I used to wear glasses when I was younger. At about 4, going down with a little boot bag to my local club.
If you could be a professional in any other sport, what would it be?
Not a boxer, because I would not like to get my head punched off. Not rugby, because that's too painful. Golf.
Who's your closest friend in football?
Probably my friend who's not actually at West Ham, plays with Gillingham, Robbie McKenzie. And we was together at Hull for 5 years.
When you joined West Ham, what position were they in?
17th.
Yes.
Was it, yeah?
Yeah. What's your proudest moment?
When I signed for Hull, and I think my family's reaction to when I signed, that was special to see them, so emotional for me.
What's your biggest influence?
My parents.
Man City or Liverpool?
What, to win the league?
Yeah.
Liverpool.
Finish the sentence. And the winner of this season's Europa League is...
West Ham United.
Of course, that was going to be the answer. What a fun chat there with Jared Bowen. All right, football is the beautiful game, and it's doing its best to help amidst all the darkness right now. Next on World Sport, meet the football star who's seen 3 wars now, and what he's doing to try and help. We are all set for the final of the Women's Champions League, and it is going to be a heavyweight clash between the most successful club in the history of the competition and the team that is now breaking records for drawing massive crowds. In 3 weeks' time, on May the 21st, the 7-time champions Lyon will play the defending champions Barcelona in Turin. Here's how they both got there. Lyon are the 7-time European champions. The second leg of their semi-final was against domestic rivals Paris Saint-Germain, and they took control with an early header from Ada Hegerberg. It was very well taken from the competition's all-time leading scorer. That put Lyon 4-2 up on aggregate, and another header from Wendy Renard settled things in Paris. Lyon advancing 5-3, the aggregate score. The defending champions, Barcelona, went into their second leg against Wolfsburg in Germany with a pretty secure 5-1 lead from the first game. Wolfsburg gave them something to think about, though. Early in the second half, Tabea Vasmut smashed the ball in from the edge of the area, and they got another one just before the hour mark. It was another long-range effort that got the better of the Barcelona goalie. This time the young Dutch player Jill Roord finding the back of the net. That's all they could manage, though. Barcelona advancing on a 5-3 aggregate score. But their amazing 45-game winning streak is now over. It is a big day for the Croatian football star Dario Srna. He has just turned 40, but he might find it difficult to celebrate because his Shakhtar Donetsk football club has more pressing concerns at the moment. They played Hajduk Split on his birthday, their latest charity match in support of the devastating war in Ukraine. As Srna told me the other day, war is something that he has experienced far too often. Dario Srna has faced conflict both on and off the field. He had a distinguished career playing for Croatia and Shakhtar Donetsk. But everywhere he's been, the haunting sound of the air raid sirens have followed him.
With 39 years, I passed already 3 wars. First in Croatia, second 2014, and this is third one. And I'm strong. I want to be strong. Sometimes it's difficult.
As a child in the former Yugoslavia, Srna came to understand the fear of war.
I have 8, 9 years. It was no nice memory. When I start, forget about that, to a little bit enjoy my life. When I listen siren 24 morning at 6 o'clock, my head and my body was turned back in 91. In Yugoslavia, I mean in Croatia.
8 years ago, his Shakhtar Donetsk club had to relocate when war broke out in the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. They were forced to play their home games across various cities. Now he's the club's sporting director, and on February the 24th, when Russia invaded, the nightmare of his childhood returned. The Ukrainian Premier League was suspended, and Shakhtar's foreign players left the team. The remaining Ukrainian players are keeping the club alive, and now they're trying to keep some hope alive for their country with a peace tour of friendly games in Europe.
For me, every sport in this moment, it's important for Ukraine. Every kind of sport, every kind of success, it's giving hope to Ukrainian citizens. Every success. And I'm so proud of everyone who is winning medal today in this difficult moment out of Ukraine.
These peace games help Ukraine in several different ways. They're raising awareness about the war, raising funds for the victims, and helping to keep the players fit, some of whom will be in action for the Ukraine national team against Scotland in the postponed World Cup qualifier in June.
We are giving to our citizens. We are here all without salary. The coaching staff, they don't receive salary, but we are now like one family, and we know what we must do. We must play. Physically, we are here, but our hearts, they are still in Ukraine.
Srna's experience tells him that this war will end, and despite everything, he is optimistic about the future.
The most beautiful period of Croatia we have 10 or 15 years after war. And I believe that Ukraine will be united until the end, and we will be, after war, all together. We will drink all together, we will smile all together, we will cry all together. The most important is peace in this moment.
Well said, Darius, and amazing work by he and his team and all the Ukrainian players and athletes right now who are trying to lift the spirits of their country in what is such a desperate situation. Happy birthday, Dario. Hope you've had a good day. That's it for World Sport just now. Thanks for your company. I'm Don Riddell at CNN Centre. See you soon.
In the West African country of Sierra Leone, there's an entrepreneurial spirit on the rise. From waste transformation to solar-powered imagination.
I want Sierra Leone to be using solar cars across the nation.
These innovators are tackling the issues
and you can use it to gain
focused on making an impact locally.
Waste management can actually transform lives.
While always thinking globally.
We care about the planet, about humanity. That's our vision and our future.
They're clean, green, climate change fighting machines.
I feel like I am living the dreams of my mothers, and I feel like that is very revolutionary.
These are Sierra Leone's ecopreneurs.
Woman for woman.
This is Inside Africa.
Okay.
Freetown, Sierra Leone. Spread out across a peninsula jutting into the Atlantic Ocean, complete with a coastline that boasts kilometers of gorgeous beaches, it's the West African country's largest city.
I have a very interesting love affair with Freetown. Freetown is a city that just has a heartbeat like no other. And as I've matured, it's a much more calming space for me. I've been able to cultivate a routine that works for me.
Aminata Doumbia is a social entrepreneur who was born and raised in Kono, in the eastern province of Sierra Leone, before moving to California around the age of 12. As an adult, she began building a successful career in corporate America, but it wasn't long before her homeland, and specifically its oceanside capital city, beckoned.
I always say maybe it's the water, because you don't just come to Freetown once and go back, right? There's always a reason, there's always a yearning in your soul to want to come back. Freetown's home, I love it.
But her return to the country in 2004 was actually motivated by a more purposeful reason.
I felt the need to want to come back just to be part of the socioeconomic transformation that I believed at the time the continent was undergoing. I actually saw the practical need for me to get involved.
Hi, welcome to BSI. BSI is my 12-year-old child that I'm really proud of.
Business Services International is a shared working space. An idea that Aminata says came to her during a meeting at a restaurant where she recognized both out-of-towners and local entrepreneurs didn't have many options for private gathering places.
BSI was basically meeting a need in the market to make sure that companies can set up in a way that doesn't break the bank for them.
This is the conference room that also doubles as my office. And what we have here is one of many awards, but I have this here because it's the one I'm most proud of. I was considered Best Female Entrepreneur in 2019.
Going through it, so it took me a miracle. That's why anything I do is spiritual.
One of Aminata's biggest supporters in her entrepreneurial ventures is Sierra Leonean hip-hop artist Shadow Boxer, who also happens to be her husband.
I'm a champion. What can be done? Keep praying one day.
One of her biggest things actually is just changing lives, especially the lives of Sierra Leoneans. And she's basically going all out to make that happen.
I changed the meeting from Friday at 10 a.m. It's now 3 p.m.
She always has something that she's shooting for. It could take months, it could take years. She's very resilient.
Welcome to Freetown Waste Transformers pilot site. This is where we've been able to learn a lot of lessons about the technology that we've deployed.
Shortly after she launched BSI in 2011, Aminata was presented with an opportunity in the waste management sector, and she wasted no time getting involved.
Our streets were filled with waste. Households, communities were burning waste, so there were no real practical infrastructure in place, and let alone the attitude of cleanliness. We set up Masada Waste Management and got households to start to get their waste collected on that level.
That experience would serve as a catalyst to launching what has become a passion project, Freetown Waste Transformers.
Because my vision was not only waste collection, but it was seeing what was collected transformed into something of value.
So what you see here is sorted waste that's ready to go into the digester. We don't want to get the wrong type of waste there in that machine.
So what is different about Freetown Waste Transformer is the fact that we are the first company in Sierra Leone to actually roll out anaerobic digestion technology. On a daily, we convert about 600 kilograms of organic food waste.
The waste that we generate is about 60 to 65% organic. So you're looking at a good chunk of our waste not going to the landfill and having the opportunity and the possibility of that being converted and turned into much needed electricity.
According to the World Bank, only 23% of the country's residents have access to electricity. And Needle Aminata is highly motivated to move.
The impact will be not only on energy access, but also curbing sanitation and minimizing our landfilling.
The operation also produces two very useful types of fertilizer.
This is our compost fertilizer. So this comes out as a result of that process we talked about. But the most important one that we have is the nutrient-rich liquid fertilizer.
The self-proclaimed energy access practitioner and waste transformer says it's taken nearly 7 years to get to this point. But now that this pilot site is operational, she hopes to begin scaling the business.
I really believe that handling waste management can be catalytic to our progress as a country.
Sugarland Beach, on the western shore of the Freetown Peninsula. Here, along the Atlantic coastline, you'll find laid-back vibes and golden sand that shimmers under the setting sun. It's also where 22-year-old Alhaji Sarajba comes to relax and enjoy the surf.
I'm an entrepreneur, CEO and founder of Russell Trading. Russell Trading is a company combating climate change. We're just doing a lot of stuff to create impact in society.
Over the past few decades, Sierra Leoneans have witnessed the impact of natural disasters firsthand. For Alhaji, this hits close to home.
I lost my dad at 12. I had to move from Kono District to Freetown City. After I lived on the street for like 4 years, I was adopted, and 7 months after adoption, I lost my whole family during the mudslide. So I had to go back to the street.
At the time of the deadly 2017 Sugarloaf Mountain mudslide, Alhaji says he was working a night shift at a drinking water plant. The tragedy would ignite a spark in the proud Sierra Leonean.
I wanted to start combating deforestation because it is one of the biggest problems we are facing in Africa and Sierra Leone at the moment. But I had just $20.
Using the factory's computer to get online, Alhaji says he began to look for solutions. And what he learned about the impact of plastic bags on the environment drove him to create an alternative.
I did research and I ventured into paper bags. We created our papers from banana fibers, so they are 100% eco-friendly because they are not from trees, they are biodegradable.
But paper bags were only the beginning. Inspired by videos he came across on YouTube, he used the earnings to start his next venture.
After 6 months, I went into producing clean, affordable and smokeless bio-briquette from coconut shells to combat deforestation, air pollution and improper waste management in Sierra Leone.
60% of Africans use wood charcoal to cook, and Alhaji says his coconut shell-based briquettes promise a more sustainable way of living. Plus, they are widely available.
We have mountains of coconut shell waste in Freetown. We can use that to produce bio-briquette.
The simple but lengthy process all happens here.
This is our production room, and this is our grinder. So we grind them inside this grinder, so it comes out like this. So after we grind the coconut shells, we mix it with our binder, which is a formula that we invented by ourselves. We mix the binder with water and the coconut shells together.
The eco-friendly entrepreneur is mindful of the manufacturing process.
We don't want to combat deforestation at the same time creating polluting the air. So we're doing it for the planet. So we manage our smoke with this pipe. It emits lesser smoke. We invented this one by ourselves.
Adama Ba, the director of Rugcha and Alaji's wife, says the impact from this project is rewarding.
When I was growing up, I don't even know what an environmentalist is. But now we have a lot of people out there trying to, sensitize us and let us know, yeah, this is good and this is bad for the environment. And if we do this, it's going to affect us individually, as a community. The good thing about youth getting into climate change stuff is they are putting initiative into entrepreneurship stuff, which is good.
His idea and how he's improving his communities, we thought was exceptional.
For Alaji, who won $5,000 at a startup conference at Harvard Business School in 2020, in addition to fighting the impacts of climate change, his motivation is fueled by giving others a chance. Now, with nearly 36 employees, he's hoping that his business will continue to grow and have an impact in Sierra Leone and beyond.
We want to have a Pan-African company that creates employment opportunity for thousands of you out here. We not just want to make money, we care about the planet, about humanity. That's our vision and our future that we want for Russell Trading.
In Freetown, we have a lot of transportation. We have the motorbike, we have the keke, and we have the buses. In other parts of the world, other countries have started using renewable energy transportation.
25-year-old Emmanuel Mansarai is making his mark by clearing the air in Sierra Leone.
The idea of the solar car was originated in the year 2018. I've started building solar car for Sierra Leone. And in the future, I would like to see this expand and grow, and people will start using solar cars instead of using fossil fuel vehicles that will harm the environment, harm the life of people.
Emmanuel says it took 3 years to design and build his imagination solar-powered car, during which he faced challenges.
This is bamboo kentique. It has headlights. It has trafficator both left and right. Moving from one place to another, like trash yard to trash yard, to get what I need. And also, I start saving my lunch money from school. I walk to college by my feet because I need money to develop my idea. This is another panel, and this panel is the source of energy for the lights, the brake system, the horn. Doesn't need any fuel to move the car. You only need the sun to power the solar, and then after the solar, it converts the energy from sun energy to electrical, and it can move 50 kilometers per hour. And if it has effective energy, it can move faster than that. Welcome to Fouabe College, University of Sierra Leone. We are right at the library where I do my research and do some findings to help me solve pressing problems in my community. Nobody taught me and how to build the solar car. I taught myself with the help of the library. So being in the library, I feel good, I feel happy.
His work has not gone unnoticed. Recently, Emmanuel was nominated for the 2022 Africa Genius Award, joining an ever-growing list of accolades.
All right, come and let me show you my awards. This is my award from the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. And also again, this is another one. During my high school days, I was awarded the best student for physics. So that gave me my imagination that, wow, I really need to do something like this. Whenever I look at my award and I feel really good, that inspires me that, wow, and this is where my talent is, and this is where my gift is. And I just want to be like Isaac Newton's, like the Albert Einstein.
Numerous sketches include past inventions in use today, including everything from cookers that run on solar energy to his very own first generator.
This was my first invention, the Galileo inventions. It was a crazy day, my time, 2014.
All these creations share a common intention, Emmanuel's desire to better the lives of those in his community and country.
One of the things I like doing during my free times is to create a prosthetic limbs to help the amputee. Because today I live in a community full of amputees and they face huge challenge to live a normal life. You can see this one, it's more like the knee. After the process, you just need something to, like a color, to match up with the patient, because some patients may be black, maybe fair.
Now, with his most ambitious dream hitting the pavement, he's driven by a sense of purpose, helping to navigate his country's path to a cleaner future.
I am very happy that Macau will help to achieve Goal 7 of the Sustainable Development Goal, which we are to achieve in the year 2030. I want Sierra Leone to be using solar cars across the nation, for people to be using it private or commercial, and that will minimize the risks of all sorts of air pollution, all sorts of health issues across the nation.
At a garment factory inside the Tees shopping centre in Freetown, lines are traced on a piece of fabric. The pattern is cut. Seamsters and seamstresses carefully sew the blend of microfiber, fleece and polyurethane laminated fabrics together. They're making a potentially life-changing product for Sierra Leoneans, reusable sanitary pads.
When I was thinking about the name, I said to myself, you know what? How about we localize it? I decided to translate women for women into Creole, and that translated to Uman for Uman.
Haja Aisatuba is the eco-conscious innovator behind Uman for Uman, a social venture she says is addressing the issues of environmental waste, sustainability, accessibility, and affordability of feminine hygiene products.
So when I got a scholarship to study in Norway in 2015, a lot of realization was made because I went to buy sanitary pads. I realized like there were so many product choices out there. That made me started doing more research about this topic.
In 2017, as a freshman majoring in environmental studies at Skidmore College in the United States, a conversation with an advisor would motivate her to take action.
I remember talking to my advisor who said, oh, there's actually something called reusable pads. So I said to myself, why does this not exist, in my country? So I bought my first sewing machine in 2017, where I started making my prototype.
3 years later, she would win a business competition and social entrepreneurship grant at Skidmore, which helped her officially launch the business in April of 2020. For the recent university graduate, this is where her roots are firmly planted and continue to grow.
This is the main house where I was born and raised, and I come home to this every day. So growing up in Brookfield was really inspiring and challenging at the same time. But one thing I really appreciate is that played a lot into my journey, especially being raised by a feminist woman. My mom, she inspired me.
And it's her mother whom Haja credits with instilling an entrepreneurial spirit.
My mom had one of the biggest cinemas in the community, and this was a space dominated by men. But she was an alpha female, like she did so many extraordinary things. I feel like I am living the dreams of my mothers, and I feel like that is very revolutionary for me.
The living room in their home now serves as their de facto cinema, where neighbors and family often gather. But when Haja needs her own space, she often retreats to her bedroom, where the first Uman for Uman prototypes were designed and continue to be evolved.
That was the first one, actually.
Or if she needs to get out, she heads to Leicester Peak, one of the highest points in Freetown.
I use this place as my safe space. I come here when I'm stressed. I come here when I need to think and brainstorm, and a lot of ideas about Uman for Uman were born here.
But when the need for a fresh perspective arises, she turns to her mentor.
I love that. I love that. That would be nice.
Yeah. Madam Leanne has been an amazing person in my life, and this shows the need for connection and reaching out, because I literally met her over a year ago and we've established such a strong connection, and she offered me valuable feedback on how to improve my business, how to reach out to different communities, what I was missing.
So Haja and I have lots of conversations. She's environmental health and I'm public health, sexual health. So we really do have a nice little marriage with, our conversations and how I support her going to schools, talking to young ladies, and, helping prepare them for their life,
A staunch advocate for women's health and empowerment, one of the core tenets of Haja's company is education.
Today, we are at St. Joseph's Secondary School, commonly known as Convent at Sykes Street. I'm here today with the JSS girls.
With the help of her mentor, Leanne, Haja developed a hygiene-focused curriculum at the school she attended as a young girl herself.
We decided to form this club. However, it was a very inclusive thing. We wanted the girls to be empowered, so it was not just me coming to talk to the girls or telling them what to do.
What do we expect during this?
Aja inspires me a lot because she's such a young girl, and nowadays it's hard to see young girls like that being somebody in our society and creating a great difference in the lives of people. And I hope that I'll become someone like her in the future and help girls and everyone around the world tomorrow.
Currently, Haja is working as a full-time Princeton in Africa fellow and says she plans to get a master's degree as well. But the ecopreneur remains driven by the promise that her social enterprise holds for all Sierra Leoneans.
So I use myself as Haja Aisatuba in my work, Woman for Woman, my environmental studies background. Basically everything I do to enter the feminist space and change some of the narratives with what I know, my experience, and where I want to be.
I believe that Woman for Woman will and does have an extreme impact on our women and girls, but not just our women and girls, our men in our community, our families at large. And this is a good way for us to shift in the way we think. And I just think that it's just wonderful, amazing that we have someone like Haja leading the way.